do some business. We went ahead and then went into committee, and I kind of liked that format last time, and just maybe want to get some input from board members and committee members if they want to do that again, kind of an informal work session, and then we'll see how far along we get, and then maybe go into committee at that time. So maybe just get a little bit of input before we get started. All right, well, we'll just go ahead and go into committee. So we'll go ahead and try that out. So I want to welcome everyone to the May 9th, 2017 Budget Committee meeting of the Maury County Board of Education. If we can let the minutes reflect that we have Mr. Pennings present, Mr. Moore, I am present, Mr. Dudley is present, and so it looks like we do have a quorum. And then also, if the minutes will reflect, we also have board members Ms. Morency, Mr. Beaver, all right, and Ms. Kinzer present as well. All right, so looks like we do have a quorum. We go ahead and get started. First item of business, we need to review our agenda. Everyone has a proposed agenda in front of them. Are there any changes? If not, is there a motion to approve? All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Moore, second by Mr. Pennings. Any discussion on the motion? So now we're ready to vote. All right, so it looks like that motion did pass on a vote 4-0. All right, moving on, we have the minutes. Everyone received the proposed amendments, minutes from the April 18th and May 2nd committee meeting. Are there any revisions? If not, is there a motion to approve? All right, got a motion by Mr. Moore, second by Mr. Pennings. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. All right, so now, let's see, I believe that motion does pass. Yes, on a vote of 4-0. All right, moving on to our new business. Looks like we have a presentation by Parallel Education Division. I think this is in relation to the substitute teachers, so I'll just turn that over to you, Ms. Hargrove.
Okay. Dave, if you'll go ahead and pull up mine. Okay.
Oh, come on.
Typical IT.
I just put in a help ticket 35 seconds ago.
My computer rebooted and
Okay.
your email yet.
Okay.
Interesting.
I can.
Do you all want us to give you all a little
What do I need
bit,
to-
and we
'cause I
maybe
don't
can
have
come
the-
back to that, or?
You got on flash drive and all?
I can just talk if y'all don't mind me just talking without the email. My presentation's very quick, just kind of tell you the whys, the whats, the hows, that sort of thing. Let me get my presentation pulled up. I wanted to start just by saying, first of all, we had mentioned this earlier in a previous meeting, but why are we doing this? And why are we wanting to even look at outsourcing subs? Our average fill rate is about 80.6%, and what that means is every day we have an average of 18 classrooms unfilled with subs. Now, we have been kind of trying to put teachers in. They've been very, adamant to go in the classrooms and help out, and we've been splitting that pay. We actually made that policy change where those teachers would get a portion of that pay. What's happening, though, is teachers are finding that now they're having to do it more and more and more, and it causes burnout. They can't give 100%, that sort of thing. So when you don't have an adult in a classroom, it's a big issue. What have we done in the past? We have recruited heavily. We've went to job fairs. We have advertised. I've worked with the unemployment office and the local career centers. We even increased their pay. A licensed sub now gets $80 a day in lieu of $66. And with that, we hired about 145 new subs this year. We have 248 active subs on our payroll, but that still is just not enough. So who is this affecting? It's not just a Maury County Schools issue. It's a statewide district issue. Every conference we go to, they're saying the same thing. We just can't find enough subs. One of the issues is we can't work subs but 4 days a week. And then, they want 5 days. Also, another thing is just reaching out and trying to get people that want to be in the classroom. So it's a statewide issue. It's not just a Maury County issue. Other counties that have been outsourcing include Cheatham County, Wilson County, Rutherford, Metro Nashville, Williamson County. There's also a lot of smaller rural areas that are actually outsourcing because their sub-pool is even smaller. And so a lot of different counties are looking at outsourcing. Some of the other points I want to make, our payroll average is about 16 hours per week just working on sub-payroll. The HR department about 8 hours per week. School secretaries are spending about 5 hours a week, and our school administrators about 5 hours a week. So it is a huge labor issue as well. Instead of the principals having to worry about finding subs, they could be doing things within their building to help the students. The plan of action that we come out with, once you say you're looking or you're interested in outsourcing subs, all kinds of companies start calling, and tons of companies made calls to my office. About 14 different companies contacted me. I either listened to them on the phone, I had them come in, talked to all of them, and we narrowed it down to 3. We didn't want to bring you 14 different companies to listen to. So what we did was we narrowed it down to the top 3. Those 3 companies, slide 6. Keep going, one more. There you go. The 3 companies were PESG, ESS, and Parallel. We formed a committee. I wanted folks that worked with either calling the subs, getting the subs in, the sub payroll. So we had actually the payroll person, the human resources person working directly with the subs, as well as a school secretary and 2 assistant principals from our largest high school and our largest elementary school that use the most amount of subs. They sat on the committee. They listened to all 3 companies give about a 30-minute presentation, and then about 15 minutes was allowed for questions. Based on the following, the committee did make their decision, and they based it on, of course, Parallel was the winner, and they're here with us tonight. They're going to give a short presentation after mine, but they already use eSchool, which is what we use now for teachers to go in and record their absences. We did not want to have to train teachers or staff on another software system. And so that was a huge selling point to us because we don't have to go out now and train. They're already used to that system. Also, they'll be in-house working hands-on with school administration. We will see the subs as they come in, so we have a lot more authority over who is hired and who is put in our schools. Parallel offers both training for not just the subs themselves, but also to train our staff, train the teachers. What do you need to leave for that sub, that sort of thing. And then they offered the best bill rate. So we looked at everything before we looked at dollars, and they did offer the best rates. Next. The real advantage to this, though, besides just dollars, principals are begging us to do this. I've even had principals in the classrooms trying to fill these sub-positions. Also, our fill rates will increase, and of course, you know, that will mean there are actually teachers in that classroom. I think we'll have better trained and better qualified subs. I don't have the manpower to do the type of training that they can do or the type of recruiting. So I think our pool will not only be better, but it'll also be bigger. And then last but not least, we just believe this is going to be what is best for the students. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Miranda, and then after that, we'll take any questions.
Is it on? Okay. Hello, thank you for allowing me to come and speak with y'all tonight. I am Miranda Cochran, and I will be the account executive for Maury County. I want to tell you just a little bit about Parallel and how we started. We started about 35 years ago as a light industrial employment agency. About 15 years ago, the Milwaukee school system came to the owner and said, we need help. We need help with our substitutes. So we started dispatching to the Milwaukee public school system. Then, about 7 years ago, the Chicago charter schools came to us and said, we can't find subs. Can y'all start working with us? So we took over a complete program. That's when we started using an online web management system, and we perfected our program with the Chicago charter schools and the Milwaukee public schools. And we did so well with that we decided to create an education division. So Parallel Education Division only works with schools. That is our main focus. It is the majority of the growth in our company. We have grown just in that division 210% in the past 4 years because there is such an urgent need to have a teacher in every classroom, and we understand that, and that is our goal. She mentioned that right now your fill rates are at 80.5%. We strive for 100% fill rate. Sometimes there may be one that doesn't come in, but we guarantee a 95% fill rate. But we do strive for that 100%. The Cheatham County School System signed on with us a year and a half ago, and we are partnered with them. And their fill rates have improved. Not only do we work with hiring qualified, professional, dependable substitute teachers, but like she said, we do teacher training. We'll be happy to come in at the beginning of the school year when you have your admin days. You're always going to have new teachers or new office people that will be entering absences, and we will be happy to come to those times and train them. They also need to know how to enter their days in eSchool Solutions to keep up with how many days they have in their bank, because we are aware that when you have an absence without pay, that you have to have a certified teacher in that classroom according to the State of Tennessee Board of Education. So we do offer a discounted rate for those absences because we know the pay rate is higher for that. Dispatching, we have a center of 10 dispatchers, and they work from 5 in the morning till 10 at night, Monday through Friday. They are available not only to the substitutes to call to find jobs, but for the teachers to enter absences, say they forgot their password, and for the administrators, the principals, to say, I can't look to see who's going to be out tomorrow. So it's a live person that's always available to your admins, your schools, and our substitutes. And then also we will, like she said, be working in-house. We'll have a full-time recruiter. Not only do we have a full-time recruiter that works just for Maury County, but we have nationwide recruiters in our corporate office that, as a backup to the local offices, sends resumes and recruits from there as well. So it's not just that one person that's going to be recruiting for Maury County. And the other thing she didn't mention is that all the substitutes that currently work for you, we would want them to come over, and we would pay Maury County a $25 referral fee for every substitute that transfers over to our payroll and becomes a Parallel substitute during the transition period. Thank you.
You'll see attached to your agenda a spreadsheet that says sub cost. What I've done is just gave my best guesstimate. We don't have May figures in. Another thing that's not included in this, such as savings, would be those teachers that have jumped in. We don't pay that out until the end of the school year. So the teachers that have jumped in and we're paying part of that salary is not included in some of these figures. But you will see, we will get a savings from, of course, Social Security, Medicare. We don't have to pay that. eSchool, which is our software system that we use to go in and mark our absences with, they will absorb the cost of that. Workers' comp will go down about $1,975 annually, taking the subs off. And then also the savings with drug tests and background checks. Now, of course, the additional cost, I've got in red there, and that's my best guesstimate based on May and April. Those figures are not final yet, but that's my best guesstimate based on last year's use of subs. And I know y'all have questions.
I do. What do you pay your subs?
We pay them what you currently pay them.
Okay.
You set the rate of what we pay the substitute
Okay.
teachers.
Mr. Pennings?
Excuse me. First off, I'm from Wisconsin. You can't trust them people from Milwaukee. Second, I received a picture earlier this year from a student of a substitute teacher sleeping in class. How do we stop things like that, and do you help us stop that?
Well, every one of our substitutes that we place and every one of your substitutes that comes over to Parallel will go through our training, and we go over everything from sleeping in class, zero tolerance on cell phone usage, and we are able to track that because that's all we do all day long is work with your substitute teachers. So if that happens with a student, then we can immediately get that sub into our office and counsel them. See, sometimes maybe there was some extenuating circumstances. Sometimes they're just sleeping in class, and they need to be counseled in that. We can remove subs from your schools, and we can make certain subs that do a great job VIP in your schools. So there's a Survey Monkey that we use, so you can go in there and rate the subs. You can contact us or our dispatch center anytime and let us know of any issues. And like I said, we want to counsel them. A lot of people sign up to be subs, and they just don't realize how hard it's going to be, aside from sleeping. So we love the opportunity to bring them in and give them further training on classroom management, correct responses, how to manage their time to get their lesson plans completed. And that's all we do. So that's how we can help you make sure that your subs are qualified, professional, and dependable in the classroom.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess this would be for Amanda or Dr. Marzek if he wants to. I see there's additional costs on this. I'm assuming you've kind of, well, let me back up. Do you think you can solve this internally? I mean, clearly we've got a problem with getting subs in here. Is this something you guys feel like you could solve internally, or would it be even more expensive than doing this?
I think it would. I don't think we could solve it internally, because even with the pay increase, and even if we increase the pay more, one thing that they can do is offer benefits to subs and work them 5 days a week, which recruits and draws more. We couldn't afford to do that. The cost would be a lot more than $200,000.
So we have looked at the possibility of allowing, I know we say we can't do them for more than 4 days a week, but we actually could. They just become full-time employees at that point
Right.
with
And
the
then you have the
associated
added
costs.
benefits cost.
But that would be considerably higher than this additional cost if we
Yes.
did that. But you guys have looked at that. It's just not
We
the right
have.
solution.
We've looked at putting a few in each school as full-time employees, but the cost is more doing that. than
Okay, so even just doing a
$222,000.
couple of, I guess, permanent subs in each school would be well more than this. And so
Yes.
we'd still have a sub shortage technically at that point, wouldn't we?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because if we couldn't afford to hire 18, 18 a day, we couldn't afford to hire that 20% that we're lacking as full-time employees, because by the time we pay their medical insurance, dental insurance, and all the benefits that we offer, it would be well.
And to be
more
clear,
than
that 18 a day is an average.
That is an average.
Clearly, there's going to be some days when it's far higher and some
Yes.
days when it would be far less, and we would have people sitting around.
A few days ago last week, we had 50 unfilled jobs,
Wow,
which is a lot throughout the district.
okay. Well, I'd make a motion to approve this.
Second.
All right, so we're gonna, right out of the box, so we got a motion by Mr. Moore, and a second by Mr. Pennings.
Okay,
All right.
I still have some discussion
Okay,
questions.
Mr. Dudley.
I know where teachers are entitled to certain amounts of time off and all, but oftentimes the reason teachers absent from the classroom is because something that administrators or the system has pulled the teachers out. Have we looked at any of that, to cut out, days where we're pulling teachers out that could have been used on teacher, days and stuff.
You'll see on the spreadsheet that I gave you the reasons why our teachers are out. You can see that, of course, sick is the most, sick from the employee. Professional development is second, and a lot of that is state mandated professional development that they have to do.
We do have,
Yeah,
we
my
do,
good.
yeah. Well, there you go. We do have Discovery Ed training. Part of the package that Discovery Ed came in realizes that a teacher has to have 80 hours of professional development to change their practice. And so by bringing Discovery Ed in, over the next 4 years, every staff member will have 80 hours of professional development. So they get away from lecture, textbook, worksheet, more into project-based learning and shifting that instruction in the classroom. But I think that's pretty much the major one.
Well, and also, to renew or advance their license now, they have to have 30 or 60 hours, depending on if they are renewing or advancing. When the state first gave those guidelines down, they said that had to be done outside the school day or it did not count. Now the state is saying it can be done in the school day and it counts. So what's going to happen is teachers are going to want that professional development during the school day instead of doing something outside hours because it counts towards advancing or renewing their license. So that PD number may jump up with those new restrictions on licensure.
What is changing to the old formula of school hours, those 7, I don't know what we decided upon, 7 period days or 8 period days, whatever. Is that going to affect any of this?
No, sir, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think that'll have any bearing on absences.
All right, you said drug tested, background checks are done on all of your employees, ma'am?
Yes, sir. We do drug testing, and we actually do 2 background checks. We do the one where they go get fingerprinted by the TBI, and those results will come directly to a designated person at the school board. So the school board will be the one that sees all of the background checks. And then we run a separate background check called Safe Screener, and it checks for the sex offender registry list, as well as the Social Security match and any other records outside the county.
Okay, if a teacher was to be employed by your firm for multiple years, do you do any in between
Yes, every summer.
every summer?
We'll do the Safe Screener every summer.
Okay. Amanda, you don't have any of the other school systems paying the substitutes more? Are they still having the same problem?
Yes, Williamson County actually started outsourcing, and Metro, they were the 2 that were a little bit higher than us. We're actually very good as far as what we pay our subs. I did contact Cheatham County, and they had nothing but good to say about Parallel. Also contacted some other counties that use other, as we were going through this process with the other companies. And again, nothing but good things. It takes the headache off the administrator. Your principals love it. It takes the headache off of a lot of manpower hours. And, another thing too involving workers' comp, all it takes is, we've had some subs get hurt over the course. If we have a huge workers' comp injury, that's going to jack our workers' comp premiums up. And so it's a little bit like GCA, but I think with this, we have more control. We'll be able to see the subs as they come in. If at any time there's an issue, the administrator can call me or call whoever Parallel has as their rep. And if they want them out of the school, they're out of the school. So I think we're going to have a lot more control and just get a bigger pool and better subs.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is for the committee. Being on the sick board for the last few years, and we're hiring a bunch of new teachers. These new teachers, there's an old saying, at least in factory workers, you don't take off when you're sick, you take off to go fishing. You take a sick day, and most of these new teachers use all their sick days. So, I mean, you hire 10, 15 new teachers, and they all take their sick days Yeah, we do have a problem.
Mr. Beaver?
Thanks, sir. What's the biggest excuse or reason that we having problems getting subs?
It kind of just runs the gamut. A lot of times they want something with benefits. A lot of industries have come in, and so, you know, I'm with General Motors, I'm with a tile company and that sort of thing. I mean, they're going there for higher wages. But a lot of it just has to do with finding those people. I mean, we've got a lot of subs, but we want good subs, and finding those people that can work with children and want to be in a classroom. A lot of times they'll think they want to do it, they come in for a couple of days, and then, you know, we lose them. So there's not one major particular reason. I think it's just finding those people that that's what they want to do. And if they do it, they do want to work 5 days a week.
But if we're running into that problem, what would keep Parallel from having the same issues?
Well, we have a full-time recruiter, which means we have someone that's all day, every day, able to go through Indeed, Monster, Career Builder, ZipRecruiter, and find people that didn't know they could be substitute teachers. There's a lot of degreed professionals that are out of a job, and they never think that they can come into a school and be a teacher and love it. But if they've got a chemistry degree, they can find, maybe it could be for 2 months while they're in between a job, that they love sharing that knowledge with a high school chemistry class. So there's a lot of avenues that we can spend time on that your administration just doesn't have that amount of time to dedicate to it. And we have such a large network. We're in 9 states, so we're able to go to career fairs, and there may be somebody at a career fair that just graduated out of an Indianapolis school that wants to move back to Columbia. And we've got a recruiter there that's passing that information down to us, and we can get them down here in this school system when they move home, when they've graduated. So we network that way as well.
Okay, all right, thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Kinzer?
I'm just sitting silent because I lived through the worst nightmare of outsourcing substitute teachers in this system several years ago. It was a nightmare. But I'm kind of trusting that we've lived through that, and you know what needs to happen. It is a year-by-year contract.
Yes.
And I'm hopeful that this will be the solution. It is a problem. But it's also a problem when you don't know who's coming to your classroom as to whether you can speak that there's some continuity on it, that, you know, the subs you have know your expectations and that sort of thing. Before, we never saw them before, after, heard from them. We had a recording we called in, and so yes, the young teachers, that was really easy. It's hard to call your principal and beg for a day off, but so I hope this will work. I support you if it does, for sure, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that it was one of the worst nightmares that we've ever experienced.
Well, I'm sorry you had such a bad experience with
Well,
it.
I'm talking
but
about system-wide.
Yes, but we will do our very best and guarantee that you will be happy with our services.
Ms. Hargrove, I was looking at the packet that we received. So I guess this particular sheet, this shows the pay rate that our substitute teachers will receive, and this shows what we'll get billed for those. Okay. And I notice in this sheet, you've got, I guess, the savings in green, and then you've got total cost in red. Would those two numbers then be brought together, and there would be a net change? Or what is the total impact on this year's budget?
The 223, 835.
The
in red.
223, okay. And is that, Mr. Superintendent, is that already in your proposed budget that we'll be looking at?
Yes, we've already built that into the budget that you've seen.
Okay. I guess I'm like a little bit like Ms. Kinzer. I've got some concerns. I guess I'm not fully convinced because some of the issues we're having with our custodial contract that we're having. But I do think that the model for us as a board going forward is for us to be able to rely upon our professionals and not micromanage. And so I've got to trust our staff that you all did your due diligence. And I like to hear that you all reached out to other counties to see what their experiences are. And so at the end of the day, that's what I'm going to do is defer to our staff on this particular decision, since you all are in the trenches and know more about the day-to-day things that some of the issues that are having. I would just ask that we make sure that we put good measures in place from a quality standpoint, from a management standpoint, so that we're getting some sort of data from the teachers and the individual schools. Either they're polled or surveyed from time to time, or they have a 1-800 number where they can contact central office if they're having issues with the contractor, so that we, from a management standpoint, central office can then say, okay, hey, it looked great on paper, what our contract says, but we're still having some issues on the front lines as far as the quality of services that we're getting. So that's what I'm hoping, is that central office will put those quality measures in place, and I'm not sure, what those procedures or what those processes need to be, but that's something that I just want for us as a board to be able to then rely upon staff going forward, that from time to time we may check in to see, hey, we need a report on, how we've adopted, if we do adopt this new system, are we getting good quality services on the front lines, the people that are being affected the most by it. So, all right. So, is there any other discussion, Mr. Dudley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where in your contract does it cover the drug test and background checks?
Top of page 9 says drug screen.
It is number 6 on page number 2.
Jake reviewed this contract as well. There was an indemnification clause in there. We took that out, but he has reviewed the contract and did make that request. That has been taken out.
I mean, I saw in here where it talked about one drug test, but I would like for the contract to include that they're getting annual checks. Is that what you
One thing that
said?
we do require is that any substitute that does not accept assignments in a 30-day period, before they can come back, they have to be re-drug tested. So because we don't know where they were those 30 days or what they were doing. Now, if they're on a medical leave, they contact us and they say, here, I'm on a medical leave, this is my doctor's, what's going on with me, and I'm going to be out for a month, then that's a leave of absence. But if they just disappear for a month and they don't take any phone calls, and then all of a sudden they're back and they want to come back into the classroom, we do re-drug test them at that point.
But you had said earlier that every summer they'll go through testing again. Is that in the contract here?
We can do that.
That's the background. Yeah, she was referring to the background check is done annually, but I think they can do drug testing annually too, if that's what.
Yes, we can do that.
Okay.
We have to renew the contract every year, right? So it would start at
All right. So, Mr. Dudley, do you want to make an amendment to the motion on the table to require that what we're approving is going to have that provision, or is everybody by common consent, can we make that change?
I mean, personally, I don't see they've got an entire procedure manual that I know they've got to hold to. I mean, if as far as I'm concerned, if the superintendent is satisfied with the steps that are in that for that entire process, I get really nervous about starting to hack up a contract just to put in a few sentences.
So no common consent. So back to Mr. Dudley.
That's where I'm at.
Mr. Dudley, would you like to make a motion to amend the motion that's on the table?
Yes, I would.
All right. So we've got a motion to amend by Mr. Dudley to approve the proposal that's in front of us, subject to the addition that the applicants will go through an annual drug test
And background.
and background check. Okay. Yes.
We could, instead of doing an annual, we could do random drug testing as well. We do that for Cheatham County. We do random drug test every month for a percentage of the substitutes that work.
Well, part of my reason, oftentimes companies or organizations hire an employee. The only time he's put through a background check is before his employment. He goes out and commits all types of crimes. He never reports it. He limps by luck. Is never brought to the attention of the company or the administrators of the organization or whatever. And then sometimes those are serious crimes. Oftentimes, the only time they have a drug test is prior to employment. 30 days after that person's employed, they start using drugs, and then by the luck again, they may go a year or 2 years before they're ever caught. And then I just think we need to do more in between testing.
And just to be clear, Mr. Dudley, so your motion is to require that the contract provide that this be done on an annual basis or at least an annual basis? At least an annual basis. All right. Is there a second to that motion to amend? All right. I'll second that motion for discussion. So we have a motion to amend by Mr. Dudley, second by myself. Now we're open the floor for discussion on that motion to amend. Mr. Pennings?
Do you have, I'm assuming you have contracts with these substitute teachers. Do you have in your contract random drug testing?
We do with Cheatham County.
Okay, so your employees can be drug tested anytime, just like I can with my employer?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yes, they wrote, that's what they preferred. They asked for us to do that, so we implemented that in Cheatham County.
But I say, when you do a contract with our substitute teachers you hire from us, will that be in the contract, or do we have to vote to have that in our contract, or what? Because I think, you should have random drug testing in there.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Dudley?
With random, what percentage are you talking about testing?
In Cheatham County, it's a 10%. Is that right? 10%. At 10% every month.
Mr. Beaver?
Thank you, sir. I'm an ex-truck driver. And one of the problems that we've seen in the transportation industry was if you got a clean bill of health, you might get drug tested 6 times a year. Every time and it seemed like it every month your number was coming up because they knew who was doing what, And so, do you just random pick them, or if you pick 10% this month, do you not make sure that you don't pick them the next month?
It's a computer-generated program that we have built into our TempWorks system that you can go back over the past month or even 2 months and randomly pick 10% of the workforce.
You don't pick it.
No, I don't pick it. The system gives the names.
Okay.
So it's random.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
All right, any other discussion on the motion to amend? All right, seeing none, we're ready to vote. All right, so that should say motion to amend, but I think we're clear what we're doing. Okay.
I've got the amended motion. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Motion to amend the contract. I've got to add the contract, at least annual drug test and annual background.
Okay. All right, so that motion to amend did pass on a vote of 4-0. So now we're back to the main motion as amended. So now the current motion is to approve the proposal subject to the amendment that we just made. Any discussion on that main motion? Send out a ready to vote. All right, it looks like that motion did pass on a vote of 4-0. All right, so with that, I guess if there's no other questions or discussion from Parallel, I guess you all are free to go whenever you want to, or you can stay longer if you wish. So, yeah, you're going to miss a lot, yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Dudley.
Okay, I know the full board has to vote on this, but are we gonna put contract in place prior to having county commission approval of our budget?
Everything that we're voting on is related to the budget, and so everything is subject to the board's approval and then the county commission approval. So nothing can be final until that point.
Okay.
All right. All right, so, thank you. All right, so moving on into our agenda, I guess one thing I'd like to do is kind of like what we've done in the past is kind of look at the big picture real quick, and then we'll start drilling down into the specifics. So if you could pull up the master spreadsheet, Mr. Parliament.
David, I was going to ask if we could skip to 4.5 and 4.6 and get those out of the way. I know that's going out of order, the painting and landscape, because I have a feeling we're going to spend the majority of our time on the other issues anyway.
Okay.
But that's just my.
I'm happy to accommodate the committee if we want to move things around. I guess my only thoughts are, sometimes it's helpful to know the big picture before we start adding things or subtracting things. And so I just want to make sure everybody understands what we're looking at. So I'm happy to accommodate. Do we want to go ahead and look at the painting schedule and the landscaping budget now? Is it okay with everybody? Seeing a lot of nodding heads. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on to item 4.5. That's the consideration of an expedited painting schedule. That's something that I reached out to Mr. Breeden, which I guess he's not here tonight. But one thing that was, I was being one big impression after we toured Baker and we toured McDowell. One thing that really impressed me was Baker had just had a new paint job, and that seems to make a world of difference as far as the general appearance and perception of a building. I think that may play a role in just the general, climate of the school, if everybody's happy to come to work, that sort of thing. So it seems to make a huge impact. And right now, the current schedule that we are on that was suggested by EMG is a 4-year schedule, so that once we get caught up, we'll be on every 7 years, there'll be a rotation at every school. We'll get a fresh coat of paint every 7 years. And I think that's a great schedule moving forward. But one of the things that I was thinking is that, well, that's kind of only good if you're starting from zero. There may be a lot of schools in our district that they may not have been painted for 20 years, or I don't know when the last time they had a paint job. And I'm talking with Mr. Breeden, my understanding is that there has been some repainting, but it's been kind of maybe one section would get repainted and then another section get repainted. It's nothing been very cohesive or comprehensive. And so I asked Mr. Breeden to just, for consideration of the committee and consideration of the board, if we wanted to, what would it take for us to kind of get caught up? If we kind of expedited things to say, okay, let's try to go ahead and get to 0 as quickly as we can, and then we'll go into kind of a rotation schedule. And so what he provided, and I asked that that be attached to our packet, he gave 2 different scenarios. One would be if we got caught up in 3 years, so we spread it out a little bit more, and the other one would be a little bit more expedited. We'd be doing it in 2 years. And of course, that changes the total cost per year, the more you try to get done within that time frame. And so to get caught up in 3 years, if we spread it out over the next 3 years to get caught up at all of our schools, it looks like the total, what Mr. Breeden provided to us for this year would be $582,588. Now, if we do it in a 2-year schedule, it's more condensed, and so that would increase our cost this year to $784,969. And of course, we're just dealing with this budget year. We'd have to be looking at this the following year as well. What I was looking at and what my thoughts were is if this is something that the committee did want to consider and the board, we would be looking at our fund balance to use this. So anyway, that's just a lot, just some ideas and just kind of thinking out loud, but I'd love to hear from other committee members and board members as to what their thoughts are on that. Mr. Moore.
Was any of this brought up in the EMG report as far as painting?
Yeah, I think it is.
Pieces of it?
Yeah, so I think my understanding is the schedule that they gave us, the next 2 on the schedule that they had would be just 2 schools. And so to get caught up, though, quicker, we'd have to expand that. We'd be doing more than just 2 schools, maybe every year.
And you'll see some of it's in-house and some of it's contracted help on some of those sheets because they can only do so much with the people they have in-house.
Okay. I say that just to be, as we're discussing this, to be clear that this isn't just new stuff we're pulling out. These are not new repairs. These are things that in total, we've talked about underneath the maintenance schedule of the next few years. We're just really ramping those up and bringing those into a much shorter time period. Obviously, the numbers go up in the short term, but the net effect would be that we would not have some of those long-term maintenances, or at least it would change where they fall under a 10 or 15 or a 20-year schedule as we're looking at this.
Yeah.
I think, well, I do think that once we get caught up, it'll be kind of the same schedule they had. Then it'd be in the 7-year cycle. So they already had kind of the 7-year cycle as part of, I think, the EMG long-term thing. It's just that we would be this either 2 years or 3 years, we'd be ramping things up. So it'd be an increased cost than what they projected out, spread it out. Mr. Dudley.
Does, how much is set aside for painting in our general purpose budget? I mean, are we setting aside enough to do the 7-year rotation?
I believe that's more of a capital project item than it is a general purpose.
No, we have a certain amount in maintenance. That's not capital funds that are for our maintenance staff to be able to do painting and repairs. There's a certain amount in there.
I think Mr. Breeden would have to answer that. I don't have that breakdown to that detail out of his budget for what he's allocated for that.
Okay.
I'll ask him the question and get you an answer here in a minute.
All right. One of my next questions is we talk about possibly pulling out for fund balance. How many different items are we thinking about pulling out of fund balance? It seems like that pot is going to get awful slim. We've had suggestions for a lot of items to come out of fund balance.
So what is the current, and the Keys budget in the pink column, where does that stand right now as far as what we're looking at potentially using fund balance from?
I believe it's, are you talking about total
Yes.
fund balance? 3.8 million.
And there's still one additional figure that I'm waiting on, which is the mechatronics lab cost at Mount Pleasant High School. I'm waiting on that figure. So that's the only thing. So it could go up by 100,000.
Okay, was any of the Hampshire stuff coming out of fund balance or payment for doing that project, or was it included in the keys items?
Do you, you talking about just the UTK proposal?
Yes.
Yes, that's in there. But there's other things for Hampshire as well. It's in the keys. It's in the pink, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's CPR certifications, Spanish teacher AP training. Graphing calculators. RTI interventionists. And that's pretty much it.
And Mr. Parliament, if you can update us, so as far as your projections as to what we will have in available fund balance when we close this fiscal year, what is that currently?
The projection as of what we have at the end of April is a little over $9 million, and that is net of the 3% reserve that's required, so.
So that's even
That-
after leaving the
That's
rainy day fund.
$9.3 million
So-
available to spend.
And Mr. Dudley, you're correct. I mean, this is a potential increase in what we would use in the fund balance, but it's something that I thought would be worth consideration. So, yes, Ms. Kinzer.
I have, I've spent some time this last week trying to get a hold of this. I hadn't looked at budgets in a long time, but, so I just have questions. The first time we saw the master sheet, it showed an excess in revenues this year of, total revenues was gonna be $6,191,000, your figures. It's showing here today, $6,841,000, correct?
Are you looking at the master spreadsheet?
I'm looking
or
at the
fund
master
ba-
that's on there right now. That's an excess of revenue that's gonna be available to us. On the first one you showed us, you showed us that we had $1,434,000 that we hadn't earmarked for anything, which hopefully could have been used for teacher salaries. But today, I'm looking at it, and all of a sudden, it's jumped up to 98 million in the budget, and almost 2 million or so of that is regular instruction. According to what you showed us that's gonna go into fund balance, and the history of fund balances in Murray County is never, ever, ever have you had a fund balance like that. And most of that came from regular instruction or vocational, or the three things. I don't have it in front of me, wait a minute. It came from regular instruction, special ed, and vocational. That means that was money that could have been spent on teachers that wasn't. So we've now got this to carry over and use for something else. And that kind of concerns me, that there is so much money in fund balance, and here we have teachers that didn't get the raise they were expected. They do hope to get a raise from what our governor has said. And I also looked at the history that we had, which is kind of interesting, because back in 2002, there were only 6 counties in the state of Tennessee that had a higher beginner salary. As of today, there's 60 counties in the state of Tennessee that have a higher beginning salary. Also, I tried to work some, and I'm not an accountant, and I have some help from friends, and looking at the 4%, you've got that the 4% increase would be $2,247,662. But Amanda was really nice to get me an updated T&E, training and experience, as to how many you're going to look at. You got so many that were in 0 years that are going to now be in 1 year. and so forth. That's what a T&E is. And based on those, a 4% is about 1,000,007. I've got so many papers in front of me, I don't know what I'm talking about right now. Here it is, 1,713,982, based on what we have. But you're showing an excess of a couple of million more dollars in regular ed, so maybe more teachers you're planning. I really don't know why it jumped up. But that's at another day. Now, I also kind of looked at the concept that Dr. Marzak proposed, or you mentioned, about raising beginning and then freezing those. And it really won't cost as much to do that as you were saying. I mean, we said 800,000 is way more than what, even at 4%. If you did that and you raised it to 38,369 and then would freeze it for just 2 years, you wouldn't have the huge increase at the early levels for the other ones. Does that make sense? Maybe it doesn't make sense to me either, but you know, maybe it does. Okay.
I'm trying to follow along.
All right. I think that, and another thing just to share with you, I know that traditionally you don't want to use fund balance for teacher salaries because that's something that is recurring. But it has been done in the past. It was done one year when the largest fund balance we ever had was almost $5 million. Once again, I've got a piece of paper, but I don't know where it is. And they put $1 million toward teacher salaries, which would be pretty easy to do with us because we've got $9 million in excess of our 3% that we're thinking is going to be in fund balance. That was saved and derived from all the teacher categories, vocational, special ed, and regular ed. So I don't think we ever, I think we're a board that wants to put the students first. Well, we cannot put the students first if we put the teachers last. So I don't think we need to be talking about all of this until we talk about the big picture. And that's teacher, what are we going to do about the teachers?
And we've got that, yeah. We've got that, but that goes back up a couple. Yeah.
A couple?
It goes up to item number 4.3.
Okay.
All right, so we're,
17, 18. One more thing.
Yeah.
Once I get the floor, I may not get it again, you know? In the last 10 years, the history in Murray County is that there have been only five times that there's been a raise. One, of course, was the $1,300 one. One was like 300 and something. There was a 2.5, and I showed it to you, and now I don't know where it is. But
And then last year.
and then last year.
Okay.
There were years that there were none,
Yeah.
5 years that there were none. Another thing in looking, and I mentioned this to Amanda today, the salary schedule is really skewed. And so I really would like to see us look at it over the course of the year, whether it's the Amanda and some, the committee to look at that. Because in year 16 and year 19, there's zero raise. And the reason for that is that you teach 15 years and then there wasn't anything. And then all of a sudden they added 17, 18, and 19. So you've got two years within 20 that there's no raise at all. And I don't mean to correct it in this cycle, but I think it's something that needs to be looked at in the long term. Once again, what did I say? We can't put students first if we put teachers last.
True. And that's the idea around the KEYS budget. The KEYS budget is to listen to what teachers need to do what we're asking them to do, and then bring those to the board and provide those resources to them so they have what they need in order to be successful. Exactly true. And what we want to talk to you about when we get back to 4.3 is what we've been able to figure out with the BEP, according to Mary Ann Dursky with the State Comptroller's Office and also with Ben Torres from TSBA. That's what we have for you guys tonight in 4.3 that we want to talk about.
so what I'm gonna do before we get too off task, and so we kind of jumped around on the agenda, but Ms. Kinzer, I agree with you. I think we probably need to talk about these things first, because I think these things are important, and I think they are a priority to talk about, and they may affect what we do on subsequent things. So I'm gonna call an audible. We're gonna go back and we're gonna look at the big picture first. Then we're gonna start getting into some of these discussions, which are, I think, good for us to have these discussions. But I think there's been some changes, and we got to get up to speed and up to date as to what has been changed. So we need to get our minds wrapped around that. And then there's been some changes in what is proposed, and we need to get our arms wrapped around that. And then I think we can have some good, fruitful discussions about what we're going to do going forward. So let's go back and let's look at the master spreadsheet, and let's start with the revenue side. And can you all blow that up so we can see that a little bit better as far as the revenue? All right, so what you all are listing now for total revenue for our proposed budget is 98.3 million. So that's in column F. All right, so I want to go back through that because you all have made some revisions and adjustments since our last meeting, and we need to make sure that we all understand what has been changed. That should be part of our packet. So if you'll pull up the master spreadsheet, there should be a tab for master. And we'll let everybody have an opportunity to grab that. Scroll down to 4.3. All right, so again, if you'll scroll back up, Mr. Parliament, to the revenue, we're going to talk about revenue real quick. We're going to talk about expenditures real quick, just a big picture overview, and then we're going to start getting into the nuts and bolts. All right, so revenue. You all now have listed local tax revenue at around 39 million. Now, the last time that we were here, that figure was around 38 million. Now, so let's pause real quick. What y'all's thought process is on increasing that amount? Because I know before we were looking at basically we would use what revenues come in this year, and then for projecting out next year, we would just flatline. We wouldn't add any increase for what we think inflation or what will increase. But talk a little bit about that real quick.
The difference between what you saw last time and this time is approximately $1 million that we've added to that. And I think that goes back to another breakdown of the BEP funding that we've worked on today, where we've tried to figure out what we need to ask in addition to what we already had to get to a number that we were trying to get to for teacher raises.
Right. So we're gonna jump ahead just a moment. So we're gonna look at the expenditure. It balances. So y'all got 98.3 revenue, 98.3 in expenditures. Those expenditures right now, you all have built in some raises. Is that
That's correct.
So
That's
we're going to get
correct.
into that in a moment. But in order to build in those raises, you all have made an adjustment on that local tax revenue by about $1 million.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, so I've got some concerns about that, and we can have some more discussion about that later. I kind of like the idea of us being very conservative and leaving that local revenue what we brought in this year is what we would ask for next year, not a increase. But has those projections changed? Well, you all are projecting what our revenue is going to be this year.
The projections have not changed. They've stayed fairly constant, so we're still tracking the same place that we have been tracking as far as current year revenue.
Okay, but so you all are, what we would have to go to the commission is to explain to them that we believe year to year, we see about a 3 to 4% increase. You all are, in this particular proposed budget, we would go over and ask them to, but use that historical data to increase what came to us this year.
And to use the information that we have from the state for BEP funding to try to get us to where we're trying to get to for teacher raises. So all of those factors are playing into that.
Okay. All right, so then the other item that I noticed has changed, well, it hasn't really changed, so we need to talk about that real quick. All right, let's look at revenue again. State of Tennessee, you all have 58.3 million. Now, that's above what we had estimated when it was presented to us back on April the 11th. I think the number that we had was around 56.5 million.
That's
So
correct.
that was the increase. Now, we have to pause right here. Whenever you all received from the state an estimate as to what our BEP funding was, at that particular time, you all thought that increase, which represents that 58.3 million, that was before the governor added anything as far as potential increases.
That was our understanding at that time,
Okay.
that there was an additional increase coming once the governor's budget was passed.
Okay, but you all have since gone back to the state to try to nail down, and it's now, you all have confirmed that the 58.3, that's it.
That's it.
That's
pending-
with the proposed increases in the budget.
Yes, pending, there'll be another estimate that comes out next month, another estimate in June, prior to it finalizing in July.
Next week.
Next week, I'm
Next
sorry.
week. Next
We
week
will
in
get a
June.
May estimate next week, and that's purely based upon ADMs from all the different
But
districts.
that
and
should not change
it-
very
It
much.
could change it. It's not gonna change it drastically,
Okay.
no.
Yeah.
All right, so, again, big picture, what you all have put on the board, 98.3 million is what we have to work with right now. And that would be with a increase, asking the commission for a $3.1 million increase over what they budgeted last year. Okay? And one thing we have to understand about fund balance, and this is something that we have to try to get the commission to understand sometimes. It seems like we had that money that we could use, but really, we can only use what they budget for us. So we got to go this back and forth with them, where we really believe that actual revenue is up here, but they want to budget down here. Okay? When they budget down here, that's what we're locked into. We can't spend any more money, even though we think that there's more money coming in, and even more money actually comes in. And so it just sits there. We get to look at it and stare at it for a year. And then, when the books close, that's when that money then rolls over. So we do have to kind of understand that about how fund balance, and it's very confusing, and it's an ongoing thing to try to get them to understand that, look, when you do that, you just you handcuff us. When you don't set the budget according to what the true revenue is going to be, we're locked in, and we can't use that. We just get to look at it until it rolls into fund balance for another year over. All right, so just real quick, another big picture, and then we're going to get into some discussion. Expenditures. All right, so 98.3 is what you all are proposing right now. You all are proposing spending of 98.3. And you all have provided a breakdown. And if we can pull that up real quick. So you'll see that is a total increase above what we budgeted last year of $6.8 million. $6.8 million, that's based upon $3.5 million more from the state. And then if the county approves us increasing our budget by $3 million. So we've got about 6.8 to work with as far as expenditures. So you'll see, as an overview, they have provided, how does that 6.8 break down? And I'm just going to run through this real quick, and then we're going to open up some floor for questions and discussion. 1.4 of that is what is in this KEYS budget that we've been looking at in the green column. So that's things like art teachers, music teachers, those sorts of things. Then $985,000 of that increase is just pure raises that come about because of you go up a step. Okay. And that just happens automatically. We don't really have any control over that. That's just part of whatever the step plan is. So that's part of that. Then we're going to get into in a moment the increases that you all have built in of the you all have added salary increases of $1,195,000 in your proposed budget.
With a request from the county commission.
That
But
would
we'll
be,
get to
right,
that.
going back to, that would be assuming they provide the total
Request.
$3 million.
Yes.
Okay. Then you all have added extra instructional staff of $578,000, additional ELL and teaching positions, which total it's 16 new people that we would be hiring.
Yes.
Would be almost 1.3 million. That would include the extra nurses that we've talked about. That would be almost 100,000. And then if we expand our bus zone so that we eliminate the walk zone, we're going to have to hire new bus drivers and have to pay them benefits. So that's going to increase us by about 300,000. Am I following along so far? And then you all have built-in extra administrative staff of 108,000. This is dealing with hiring Mr. Carver.
Yes.
Okay. And then health insurance increases. You all are showing that for our total budget, our health insurance is increased by $840,000, or that's what you all are projecting. Am I okay? All right, so let's go back and let's open the floor. Let's first talk about revenue. We went over just from a general standpoint the revenue. I'm going to open the floor for any questions or discussions about that. If not, we're going to move into expenditures. All right, so let's move into expenditures. So we've got a summary. We've also got a detailed breakdown of the expenditures in the master spreadsheet. So what I'm going to do is now open the floor for questions and discussion. And this may be a good time. Dr. Marzak, explain to us the salary increase of 1.195. Tell us about that and what are the potential options that you all have for us to look at.
Yeah, if you'll pull that sheet up. Okay, so conversations we had today with both Mary Ann Dursky and also with Ben Torres. So basically what we've been able to deduce is that our entire additional BEP instructional personnel increases comes out to be about $1.9 million. From there, because there's growth included in our BEP estimates, there's about additional 16 positions that the state has funded because you said you're going to rise above minimum levels or maximum levels that we fund at. So that basically boiled down to 4 ELL positions, 3 K through 3 positions, 7 4 through 6 positions, and then 2 7 through 9 positions. So they're saying those are additional positions we're going to need to hire. That leaves an amount of about $630,512 left over for licensed BEP personnel, who the state classifies that as instructional teachers K through 12, career and technical ed, special education teachers, ELL teachers, translators, art, music, physical education, and librarians, school counselors, central office supervisors, special ed supervisors, vocational supervisors, special ed assessment, principals, assistant principals at the elementary and secondary level, and then social workers and psychologists. So that leaves about $630,000 for a raise for those staff members. Now, why the amounts are different than we have heard from some other people. So what we learned today from Mary Ann Dursky and Ben Torres is we've been receiving a pot of money called at-risk money, and that money is due to students on free and reduced lunch. What the state did this year is they changed the classification of students that qualified for free and reduced lunch that we got money for. In the past, it was based on the students, on the parents that filled in the form and the forms we submitted to the state. This year, the state said they're not doing that anymore. So they've only given you money for the parents that have taken out food stamps. So in the past, or last year, we got at-risk money in the amount of $4,078,861. This year, that has dropped to $3,333,871. So that's part of the hit that Ben Torres and Mary Andersky told us about, that you're getting a little extra in BP, but they're taking it away from you in a little bit because you now have classified as a lower at-risk population because you don't have as many parents that have food stamps as many parents that filled out free and reduced lunch forms, and you guys sent that in. So really, we're moving from 71.49% BEP funding, no, 71.14 to 71.49. So our BEP funding is only raising about 0.3%. We're not jumping up whole percentage points. So had we not, and that's according to the bottom information that impacted the budget, had we not had that $744,990 hit, we would have been able to add that to the $1,900,033, which means we would have had almost between $630 and $744, about $1.3 million to budget for raises. But we don't have that. We only have $630, $512. So what we've done at the bottom of this sheet is we've thrown down 4 possible scenarios based on things that we've talked about in Budget Committee for just giving raises to just classroom teachers. We have about 986 of those. Giving raises to all licensed personnel, which is 1,054 employees, or giving raises to all Murray County employees across the board. And that's 1,611 employees. So what we did is we broke that out to the right as far as the amount that person would receive. And then we also threw in scenario 4, which was to fix the salary schedules. That cost was about $815,137 for the fixing the bachelor 0 through 4 and the master 0 through 4, which would then leave us $379,945 left to budget still from the BEP personnel. Should the increase of $564,570 be granted by the county commission. Does that make sense? It's the best I could do.
Ms. Kinsey.
This took us about 4 hours to figure out today with working with Ben Torres and Mary Andersky. Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate that you worked 4 hours on it. I think what we need to do is work more than that to reduce some other areas.
Which we can do that.
Absolutely. And we all feel like maybe, I mean, I personally feel like there may be some looking at the central office, maybe some jobs there that maybe we're overfunding. We sat and heard our governor say to us, I want all of this to go to teacher salaries, raises. And understand that we're slightly over that state 44,
We
whatever
are.
that is. We're very slightly over that.
Yes.
That allows us to use it for other things, which you all used last year for technology. And the teachers got the 1,300 and something raise. I don't want that to happen again. I want them to get, I don't want the fund balance to be as a result of funds that weren't spent on them.
Okay.
I don't want fund balance to be $9 million that we have just not used on the
Well-
people who are doing, let me tell you something. Learning happens in a classroom.
Yes.
And a good teacher, a teacher with good benefits, which we know we give, but every beginning teacher, they don't come and say, what are you doing with my insurance? They want to know what beginning is.
Yes.
Okay, and then benefits, yes, we do have great benefits, but we've got to do something about that. But I can't vote for anything less than a decent raise that those teachers did not really get last year, because at one level, some of them got less, unless you do a percentage across the board. So I say we need to cut some areas, and so that we can take care of the, and do what our governor said, put every bit of that on teacher salaries.
Okay.
Well, one thing, and it's very convoluted how the state funds, and so that can be very difficult to follow these things. But I believe MCEA came to our last board meeting and made a presentation as to what they said they had their attorneys look at, as to what we were receiving in extra funding for teacher raises or instructional position raises. It was $950,000.
Now, I'm not speaking from MCEA.
Right, but I'm just
Talking-
saying, as far as what the state has provided us in extra funding, I think it's around $950,000. Yes, we are getting 1.9 million total extra for instructional positions, but then there's the question, do we not fund the growth of these potential 16 positions, which is going to consume about 1.2 of that? And then, so I guess we could say that we could increase student-teacher ratios and not fund those extra positions, and then we would have more to be able to fund raises for existing staff. I mean, we could potentially do that. That's a possibility.
You can't exceed state minimums. They sanction you if you do that. And you have to come up with a growth plan to reduce those. So we cannot have averages or individuals' classrooms go above state maximums. We can't do that.
So do we not have any flexibility, though? Are you saying that if we do not hire those 16 people, we will be over the maxes?
Well, we budget for those 16 people, and as it gets close, then we hire additional personnel. For example, we may not need to hire 3 of these elementary school teachers until maybe October, but we don't know that. So we budget for the hopes that we're going to need those people. According to the state, with the current growth that we're receiving, they're saying we're going to need at least 16 additional staff next year. Plus also the governor said he wanted more ELL teachers to reduce the ratios. And so that's why we went from an ELL teacher funding ratio of 17.4 to 21.9. So he's funding, even though we may not need it, he's funding 4 additional positions to reduce the ratios in ELL.
Now, let me ask real quick, this expenditure, this total bottom line, did you all include any of those raises for central office?
No,
No.
none of those are in there.
So that's not in there?
No, sir.
So if we're going to find additional funding, we would have to eliminate some existing positions or do something like that?
Or remove some of those things on the green list under GP, on the Keys budget, because that's built into this. So remove some of those and we get more money.
And I would add, and I understand the comment about having the large amount sitting in fund balance. I would just really urge not funding salaries from that $9 million, because at some point it may come back to bite us. So, and that may be 5 years down the road, but once those salaries start get building in, then you're locked into them.
It's
So,
only been done one time.
right.
Yeah.
But that's when they had such a big fund, the largest fund balance we've ever had was $4,884,000 in 2008.
Well, you had 12 million last year.
Well, then I don't know about last year.
12 million was the audit, 12 million 5 was
Well,
your
that's-
audited fund
that's too
balance from
much.
last year.
That means that's something that was budgeted because we thought we needed it, but thought we needed the money to spend and use it, which in the case that we looked at, in fact, is instructional. We didn't
Right.
spend that money in instructional, and yet you're saying to me now we've got to have all these extras, and I'm all for that. I'm all for having the people that we need. But I also don't think you need to fund the budget on the instructionals back. I don't. I don't think that's right. There was something else I was going to say, but you know how that goes.
And I think it's a difficult game that you play, because then if you start looking at the GP budget and you say, okay, let's take out $3 million to go fund teacher raises, then you run the risk of getting into the year and not having the funding available to do what you need to do. So it's a balancing act.
I don't think it's the best case scenario to take it out of fund balance, no. But I do think there are some things that are not recurring expenditures that could be taken out of fund balance and taken out of our general purpose.
We did that last year to fix some holes. Like we did
Okay.
tubes and tires. We moved some of tubes and tires over to fund balance and freed up a little bit of GP money. We did do that last year.
Okay, and one more thing. I am not just sitting here advocating a raise for teachers. I really think that the staff that we have is just as important. And, I think of the people that work in special ed and they make a very small wage and they deserve a raise as well. So I'm not just sitting here worried about teachers. I'm worried about that Murray County, if we're going to become the #1 in the state of Tennessee,
Yes, we are.
because we've got these computers, but I want people
Not just
to come here
computers.
because, right, but I want them to come here because we have a competitive beginning salary. We have great benefits that we have, and we're going to continue that. But I want them to know that they're appreciated and they are, that we want to keep them. We want to get them and we want to keep them. That's the big thing,
Well,
is to retain them.
And look at everything, I'd say look at everything we've done over the last 19 months. It's really made an investment in teachers. This board invested in Discovery Education, 4-year, $2.4 million contract, which gives professional development teachers to change instructional practices in the classroom. Teachers requested the software program Dreambox. Teachers requested the software program Myon. Teachers requested the software program Next Lesson. These are all coming from teacher committees that have requested these because they see them as valuable learning tools in the classroom. The same thing with the keys. There's a reason why principals met with teachers and got feedback around things that they needed in the classroom in order to be successful. So teachers are getting headbooks. They're getting headphones. They're getting Chromebooks. They're getting graphing calculators for their math classrooms. Even though the board did reserve $1 million last year for a diploma, about $350,000 of that is for teachers to have updated laptops so that they then can turn around and get their students laptops. So even that money is going invested into teachers. And so what this board has really done is we believe in you so much, teachers, that we're willing to surround you with all of these resources to give you what you need in order to be successful in the classroom. Last year, we were able to do the 1,340, which I think on average, if I'm right, Eric, equaled out to about a 3.8% raise for the people that got the 1,340, and then a 3% for classified employees. So what we need to figure out now, and I need some help from you guys, is so where do we turn the dial to increase salary raises for teachers? Because we have 1.435 in the green column that we're figuring into our budget. So do we dial some of those down, move those back over to the blue, which then put pockets of money into different areas that we then can use for salary increases? Where do we dial? That's the question. And I think that's really what we're here about. Where do you guys want to dial?
Ms. Morency.
I'm all for teacher raises, but I'd also like to know, where are our salaries for our teachers? Where are we low?
Okay, so we have that from, what budget committee meeting was that?
And rather than just give
We have
across the
that.
board raises, I'd like to see us adjust some of those so that we are to the
That,
point where we are competitive with the,
and that was the reason for scenario 4. So what we brought to a previous budget meeting is we produced the salaries. In some areas, we're higher than other counties, in some areas, we're not. It all depends how you progress. But what we noticed the greatest discrepancy was our bachelor degree teachers years 0 through 4 and masters years 0 through 4. So what we said is if we can go about $1,000 higher than a local competitor, I won't say who they are, but that cost to take all of those salaries years 0 through 4 and bump them up, which would then put us higher than some of our local competitors, would be a cost of about $815,137.
well, and I guess, because I don't know how the teacher salaries is, I don't know it as well.
We can pull it
as
up if
Betty
you want
does.
us to pull it up.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I don't know how ours work. Do they get to a certain point where there's no more raises for? 20 years they top out. How many teachers do we have over that 20 years? Because I don't understand why you would not give raises after a certain, and do all counties do that?
That's a good question. I don't know.
They, between, some top out at 20, some go to 25, some keep going to 30, some just keep going forever. But what we found was usually when, our 20 is about what some people's 30 and 25 top outs are. It's just that starting range that we're so low in and not competitive in.
Okay, well, and I know that's not gonna make a lot of teachers happy, but I just don't see giving across-the-board raises just because. I think that we meet those, where where we have a deficit in, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we throw out the 4 scenarios. For, how deep do you want to go? Do you just want to do just classroom, just licensed, or all employees? So, where do you guys want to go?
We have 202 teachers that are topped out at 20 plus.
Out of 986.
I don't think we're talking about giving a raise just to give a raise. I think they've earned it, and I think that.
Agreed.
I don't think that's what the issue is at all. Maybe to answer her question, we do fare fairly well on a state level at the master's degree and higher. We always have. And part of that is because we have the teacher salary index. You can do what you want to do and raise beginning, but not maybe lock it in for 4 years, and that would save some money in that. Maybe lock it at zero, start around at the 38 something. I think at 4%, it moves it up to about 36, and then if you moved it up to 38, that'd be a pretty big raise even for year 1 and 3. I don't think it would cost $800,000 to simply do that, in addition to, after you do the percentage raise.
All right, so Ms. Kinzer, what you've got in mind, let's get some ideas on the table, and let's talk through this and have some discussion. So what would you be looking at as far as, other than maybe what's already up there? What would be your thoughts?
I would like to see a 4% increase in teacher salaries across the board to all employees, and I would like to see us move bachelor to 38,369 at year 0. That would make us competitive with all of our surrounding counties, with the exception of Williamson County. Well, no, we would with Williamson County, not Rutherford, not Wilson, but and not Bedford, which that's not close to us. But that would make us even more than Williamson. But we would lock it in just to year 1, okay? 0, 1. That's what I'm looking at, right here. Right here. I mean, okay. If you do it for the 4 years, though, that would be 4 years that they wouldn't get any kind of increase at all.
Unless the board gave raises.
Unless the board gave raises.
True, there'd be no step increases for years 0 through 4. Your next increase wouldn't come until year 5, when you would jump from 38,000 to 39,549. So you jump up $1,549.
Okay, and what I'm proposing, it would be 38,369 in year 0 and 1. That's how we list it. And then in 2, it'd be 38,896, and then it would jump up and pick up to year 5, 41,131. Masters would then be locked in, and beginning would be 42,181. That's with a 4% raise.
All right, so let's get some, Mr. Palmer, you're going to get your calculator
Do you have a
out.
doc you can share with us?
All right,
I
so,
don't have it where I can, but I've got all these papers in front of me that
Right.
I'm really honestly not a figure person, but I have
well,
spent a lot of time.
we've got our
thinking about
figure
it.
guy over here. All right, so, Ms. Kinzer, what you're talking about would be to give a 4% raise to all teachers and all employees, or just teachers?
I don't see how you can not do it for everybody. I don't think it'd be right.
All right, so what would be the cost if we give a 4% to all employees, Mr. Parliament?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I think we have
Commissioner
to,
Phoenix.
said, are we also going to give it to food service? Because normally when we're talking about raises, we're not talking about food service.
That's right. It would probably exclude food service because they're under a different budget.
It would exclude food service, part-time, and me.
If it would help, I have calculated it to be $1,713,982. That's for the teacher salary schedule.
So,
But 4% across the board is 2.4 million.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Right.
across the board. I
It's
said
a little over
teacher salary
2.4.
scale. Right.
all right, so the total cost for all employees with the exception of
1,700,000
food service and with the exception of part-time would be 2.4?
Approximately 2.4, yes.
Okay. And then to move the scale, as Ms. Kinzer was talking about, for entry level, I guess bachelor, to 38,369, what would be the total impact on that?
That's a harder one because I don't know how many teachers we have in those categories.
Well, we've got it now. She provided this today, that we have a T&E.
I got it.
I've got a copy right here. You really couldn't look at any of this until you looked at the updated T&E, and that's what we did today. There it is.
So what are we at 0 now? If we're moving to 38,369, what are we at now?
It's 0 for bachelor's is 35,203.
So that's a $3,166 increase times, am I reading this right, that there's 45?
There's 40, it would affect 45 at year one.
So that is 142,470.
Okay, but we don't know how it would be at year zero because we don't know how many new ones we're hiring. But you've also got attrition. You know, we don't like to mention that, but there is that.
Right.
That kind of offsets it.
So the total, so it'd be 2.4 million for the 4% and then around 142. So the total would be around 2.55 maybe. All right. And so now we would have to go back, if we can go back to,
I think the cost estimate that I have for just doing it for the 2 years, locking it in, is $112,251. If you did it for 3 years, locked in your 38, you know, it wouldn't exactly be that. I had a different figure there. 38,896 would be 167,000. If you did it for 4 years and locked it in at 39,442, which is, you know, you got to look at how much the increases are going to be for that person that taught the first year, and then the next year he's going to get a whopping increase just because he's locked into that new number. And that would cost $268,145. And I know I may not have the perfect figures, but
To
they're
get
color-coded because you know I like color.
But to get where we are now to where you want to get to me, in year one is $142,000.
Okay.
That's not saying you lock in for the next year. I mean, that's going to be additional to that in future years. But to get to that starting level, that's an additional $142,000.
and what you all have
That's
built
what
in
yeah, that's what I said.
to the 98.3 million budget is only, the raises would be around 1.2 million, I think. Is that what you all?
Yeah, 1.195. Provided that the salary increase from the county commission at 564,570 passes.
All right, so not only would we have to increase their budget by 3 million potentially, or we'd have to find savings elsewhere, but we'd have to find another, 1.355 million in order to fund a 4%? What's the difference between the total amount of what Ms. Kinser's talking about, which is around 2.55, and then we already, in this current budget, is around 1.2, so that's another around 1.355?
3.8, somewhere around 3.8, 3.9.
Total.
Wow.
No?
No.
All right, so, Mr. Parliament, you've got, in the current budget you all have presented to us, you all have increased salaries by $1,195,000, correct?
Right.
All right, so in order to reach what Ms. Kinser's talking about, how much additional amount would we be increasing the budget?
$1,365,000.
All right. All right, so Ms. Kinser, we're back to you. So how would you how would you work through that? Would we add that to revenue? We would ask for additional revenue, or
No,
would we take that out of other budgets?
I think we need to find some places in the budget to decrease. That's what I don't think you should ask for additional revenue. I don't think you'll get it. But I would say to you that if this is what this board, the consensus wants to do, then I would ask you to come back with a budget where you have found 1,300,000 or whatever that figure is, where we can put it on teacher salaries.
And I think one of the things to think about, I mean, if that's the route we want to go, are there other routes that we want to explore? Because we can spend a lot of time going back and forth saying, let's find this 1.3 million, and then decide to go a different direction, and you're basically starting all over again, trying to find where those dollars are coming from. So,
What do you mean by different direction?
like, if you decided that you didn't want to do 4% for all employees and you didn't want to move that starting, if you come up with a different amount, because right now, if we do this, you're saying we need to go back and find $1.365 million. And all I'm saying is, if we change direction again and that number changes, then we have to go back and figure out, okay, do we add this back in? Do we take something else back out?
I think once the board, I'm not a voting member of this committee. I'm certainly spent my time talking, I guess, but I think it's whatever the will of the board is. And when the board says, yes, we're going to do this, it's going to be a 4% raise, and then that would then say to you, then we don't want to have to increase what we're asking for to the commission, and we'd have to go back in some line items and adjust them.
Absolutely. And I'm not arguing that point. I was just,
Well, and I think this is good. This is good to
Right.
have the discussion. I mean, we've got to generate some ideas, and we've got to try to work through this, and maybe alternate ideas. I will throw one little wrinkle in things. I'm not, as far as the funding, I'm not even there. Because to get to there, they have added another $1 million to the county's funding. So we went from asking for $2 million to asking for $3 million, and it gets out of us asking, I think, what is a conservative number of just staying stagnant as to what revenue we brought in this year. It's going to be asking them to increase funding to assume that our economy continues to grow at a 3% next year. So, and maybe I can be convinced of that, but I've already got heartburn there.
You had heartburn last year.
Yeah, so that's where I'm struggling, and I like the ideas, and the thing is, I would love to be able to do that, because I want us to be as competitive as possible with teacher salaries as well. I think, that's very critical, but it's trying to figure out how to do it. All right, let's get got some lights on Mr. Dudley, and then Ms. Morency, and then Mr. Pennings.
Okay, but what we just got through talking about is as far as adjusting the pay for the new hires. Does any of those scenarios end up where the new hires with those bonuses are making more than the employees we've hired in the last 2 or 3 years with the same degrees? Okay, because I don't want to get in a deal where the new hires make more than any of our existing employees.
Yeah, I think with the numbers that we threw out, the 0 to 1 would be approximately $500 less than year 2 starting out. So they would be just under the year 2.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to show you how stupid I am about this. So are there do the teachers get step raises?
Yes,
So they are getting raises.
yes,
So what,
Yes,
For experience.
For experience.
okay,
and degrees.
right. But, so how often are those raises given? How often are the step raises given?
Every year, up through year 20.
So when you say we haven't given raises, we are giving raises.
We haven't increased the salary schedule, that's what we haven't.
We
increased
call
the
those
salary
step
schedule.
increases.
There's a state step raises, excuse me, there's a state, I guess there still is, isn't there, that is the same, that is a salary schedule based on every year of experience, you're rewarded for that.
Right.
But we haven't, increases are usually across the board. Am I saying that right?
So, but teachers are actually making more next year than they are making this year.
Yes. And then
Okay.
you stay the same for there on out.
Okay, so they are getting,
If we don't give any additional percentage raises.
If we don't give any additional
Which
percentage
is not
raises.
gonna happen.
Thank you.
okay.
And
Good question.
cost of living goes up.
COLA, yep.
It's on the website.
Yeah, and it is confusing, Ms. Donna. I mean, I've been here 9 years and it's still confusing. But the 4% I'm not sure of, even though I know we have to increase it, but I do firmly believe that we have to, in order to attract new young educators that, by the way, probably know more about the computers than that, so we don't have to teach them because they haven't been in it, because the old adage
You'd
is.
be surprised. You'd be
Yeah.
surprised.
The old adage is, it's easier to teach someone something if they don't know anything about it than it is to try and change their mind
Yeah.
once they've done it. We need to increase the starting salary for new teachers, we truly do.
One of the problems we run into with new teachers is we have to retrain them because using this for Instagram, Snapchat, texting, or tweeting is not the same as using technology in the classroom. And we practically have to retrain a lot of our young teachers about how technology usage in the classroom needs to go. You'd be surprised. You would think they would come in and they'd be ready to rock and roll, good to go. They're great at Snapchat filters. They're not so good at how to use technology in the classroom to further learning.
I think Trump just sent you an email.
Probably did. He's probably wondering, hey, Chris, when are you coming up tomorrow? This is huge.
Mr. Moore.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in there with where Ms. Morency was going, because I'm good at saying things out of turn. Coming from the regular business world, it's frustrating to me.
Uh-huh.
Again, I own my own business. I don't get automatic raises. I don't get there just because I've been doing something for longer than, over 25 years now myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, again, when we talk about things, we have to be honest about what we're talking about. And I'm not disparaging what teachers make, but I think what point Ms. Morency was making is there are raises coming in here. And in the few years we've been on here, there have been raises that have come out on top of the step raises. So these teachers are making additional money. So it's not like their pay is frozen, and it's not going up. Or like in my case, sometimes it goes down from year to year.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we need to make sure we're talking about the same thing on that. I guess the point I want to get to on the 4%, and I'm not, I guess I'm with Mr. Bates on that. I'm not even to this point yet, much less getting past to the other part. Where is that number coming from, the 4% number? I've heard some people say that the governor has said that's the number. I haven't seen any numbers that are actually,
That's what he
clarifying. That's the rumor mill is 4%. I just want to be clear that we're actually talking about something that's real, or is that just a number we pulled out of the air?
The governor says 4% every year, and superintendents beg him not to, because you're only getting 4% of the 70% that you get.
And I appreciate that, but I think to go further,
Yeah.
really, it's not even based in anything, is it?
It's based,
It's an imaginary percentage that is just kind of thrown out there and people grab a hold of it. I have not been able to find anybody that can put that to numbers and make
No.
it come out to anything that comes up to a legitimate 4%
No.
of anything.
no.
And I think that's important when we talk about these numbers that, and again, I can understand why superintendents would be very frustrated with the governor of throwing just a random percentage point out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we saw last year when we did do a set raise, and that was a frustrating point for us. There were a lot of teachers that felt like they should get a percentage, and we didn't do that. And I think we're probably going to hear some of that this year if we don't give a percentage, regardless of what that percentage is. But again, I think that's just an important point we need to make sure when we're talking about this, that 4% that the governor threw out there is not a real number.
Yeah.
It's just a percentage he said, and again, if somebody can show me how we get there, as far as the numbers that are coming to us, I'm just not seeing it yet.
And it's actually closer to about 175 to 22 is actually where the range is, because like I said, you're only getting money based on the 70% that you received. So it actually in real dollars with local and state, it actually comes out between 175 and 2.2%.
And we, at the end of the day, we may decide, we ask our county for additional funding to be able to try to get to that point. But this is a great process, so we can see this in black and white. What, Ms. Kinzer, and I appreciate you doing this, because we know that to fund a 4% raise would require $2.4 million. They didn't give us $2.4 million for increases. They gave us 1.9, and much of that was because of ADMs increases because of growth. So they never gave us enough money for a 4% raise. Even if and I think MCEA what the information they provided is the amount that they may have provided for raises around 950. You can't take 950 and get 4% out of that, no matter how you do the math. It's funny math, but that's the way the state, calculates those things. So.
Can I just comment, because I'm probably way older enough to know when the BEP was first funded in this county, and part of the reason that they don't send 100% of that is because it hadn't been fully funded. Ever. And the other reason is, in order to meet maintenance of effort, that means we got to spend some local dollars. They didn't feel like that they should just send the raises down, give them. They want local control, local dollars to be involved in it and spend on it. That's part of the reason in the beginning, is that we knew, and at one time it was like 75%, so now it's down to 70% that they send, but that's because they expect us to use some local dollars.
Well, and the funny thing is as far as that required match, most counties are already way above what the state pays in a base salary. And so that local match doesn't even come to play, because the state, when they're trying to fund these things, it's a theoretical position that they're funding, which is much lower than what the average salary really is. So you start from that base point, it's already skewed incorrect, because, and two, what they're giving a 4% is not a 4% of all those different salary schedules. It's not like beginner and a master's, they're giving 4% for each one of those levels. They're giving 4% at way down here, okay? And then they expect to give that to the school districts and say, okay, now somehow, pull a rabbit out of your hat, and that's just not possible. But anyway, Mr. Pennings and then Ms. Morency.
And I know where Mr. Bates is coming from. We sat in these budget meetings for the county last year, and I don't know, it took about a couple of hours before even their own county commissioners got it through their head. You're not raising the maintenance effort, you're just giving them the money the extra revenue that came in. Unfortunately, you've got a bunch of county commissioners. They see that as raising the maintenance of effort. Now, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but say you spend $100,000 this year, that's what they fund. That's maintenance of effort, so next year they have to fund at least $100,000.
Yeah.
So if they give us an extra $3 million this year, even though the increase is there, the money's there, it's in our fund, they think to themselves, well, if we do this now, next year we have to fund that amount. And that's where the problem comes with the county commission.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I have this right. I have the figures for bachelor, 11-year to 12-year, and the step raise is about $888, right around $900. And then if we gave the 4%, that would be an additional $825. So that would be a raise of $2,700. That's
cost of living is what you're looking at too. I mean, if you don't give raises for several years, which is I know in 10-year period, we went 2 years, nothing was done on, even though, yes, there was a step raise, but you've got an increase in the cost of living. Yes, we've given them lots of materials and software for their classroom. They're surrounded by all this new stuff and new ideas and passionate things in the future, but they got to pay their bills. They've got to, they got children and childcare and all that sort of thing. And so if you keep it stagnant and you ignore the fact that the cost of living has gone up, we're in an area where there's a boom in new businesses and building, and people are moving in here, and we're in a time when the economy is better, and yet we're going to say to them, no, you just need to stay where you are. And let me remind you of this. I taught, and I don't even talk about, I'm not a good example. I don't even have a master's. But a person can get a master's, or they're plus 30, and they can teach for 30 years. And they don't make that much money considering their degrees and their experience that they might get in industry. So if you want to keep them, those experienced people who dedicated their lives to these children, and they're giving up the big salaries that they might make somewhere with their degrees, then you've got to pay them, and it's got to be a commensurate with what the economy is and what their degrees and their experience is.
I'll jump in just real quick. And Ms. Kinzer, I'm 100% in agreement with you as far as my desire. I mean, I want to do the same thing. I mean, I would love to be able to give a 4% raise. I really do. Me, it's just then when I go to the phase of then trying to put together the puzzle, that's where I start having difficulty because, again, I haven't got past the revenue issue with us finding the 1.195. If we have to find an additional $1.3 million, it may be that maybe they can find some ways of shrinking budgets, and I'm all for that too. But I'm concerned about, well, where else will we find the funding, like with our Keys budget for art teachers and music teachers and things like that. That total amount is around $1.4 million. And so would we make that choice? Would we say, okay, our superintendent has met with the schools and they've identified what is critical for them to be able to move the county ahead in reading and math and those critical areas, and that's going to require funding of 1.4. Do we take the money from that pot and then we do the raises? And I want to be able to do that, but I guess that's where my difficulty starts coming in. I think that the things that we're funding from the Keys, I think, are critical. I think we've seen some improvement because we have started funding those things, and I think we have to continue to fund those things. We also have to fund teacher salaries and our employee salaries too. That's a critical need too. It's just one of those things. It's that difficulty of dealing with all those needs and not a large pot of money, or it could be, and you have the difficulties of being able to get that funding from our funding body as well. So, Mr. Pennings, and then after that, I think it's about time for a break.
I agree with what Ms. Kinzer is saying, but the cost of living, yes, the cost of living here has gone way up. The cost of living has not gone way up for the United States government. Cost of living increase this year was 0.1%. That's what the general public that are on Social Security, which I've been on, got, 0.1%, not because the cost of living here has maybe went up 10%. I don't believe you can look at it that way.
Did you have something else, or?
Take a break?
Yeah, let's take about a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 8:10. Okay.
instance, Mount Pleasant Elementary got a,
Yes,
he got 0.
for supplies.
All right, we're gonna start coming back to order in a moment.
Yeah, but then your kids and the teacher are the ones that cover.
All right. All right, we're going to go ahead and start coming back to order. Before we get started, though, I do want to get some input. We've been going for 2 hours. I'm happy to continue on if we think we can go ahead and get some business done tonight. Do we think that we can work our way through this, continue with some discussions, and go ahead and get some action done? Or are folks leaning more towards going ahead and maybe getting some information and then let this kind of marinate, and we come back on Tuesday to figure things out? Mr. Moore, you always got some feedback.
Wisdom is the word you were looking for.
Oh,
I have
okay.
wisdom
Yeah,
to add to the
yes, I was
discussion.
searching hard for that.
I don't think we're going to get anything substantial done here this evening. That's as far as voting on something. But I think there's some good discussion that's taking place about kind of the direction maybe we're looking at going. And I think that would probably center around the two pieces that we've talked about here. It would be and I don't have the screen to look at anymore, the additional money we were looking at adding on top. I think that was kind of the one piece that stands out to me as a discussion point, how we would get there if we do, or if we as a board want to ask for that. And then the next piece would be in any kind of a raise, how much that would be and what that would look like and where it would come from. So, obviously Ms. Kinzer threw out a 4% number, and we've kind of gotten some numbers that give us the total amount of what that would look like. I guess I would like to see us maybe this evening to get somewhere with some discussion on, is that where we as a committee want to go, or do we want to start to refine that and maybe have central office take the direction we're going? I think Mr. Parliament made a good point earlier when he was talking about chasing, kind of going around and around in circles. I think it would be helpful if we as a committee could kind of start to narrow that down and give them something to look at, if they need to refine the budget and make shave some things off some places, maybe give them some ideas where to start, some ideas that we're okay with, and have them bring us some numbers for us to go back and look at it and see if they can get to where we're looking to go.
Okay.
That's kind of what I'm
We got
envisioning.
some input from some of the other members, Mr. Dudley.
I too agree. I think we first off need to solidify our revenue. What figures we're going to use that, because there has been a significant change from what we'd talked about in some of the earlier meetings, so we need to do that. As far as the pay raises for employees, I don't know that we can find enough for 4%. I'd like for us to look at maybe some multiple options there, maybe 2, 3, and 4 with us
right.
on those. And then, as David said, if we decide upon what raises are going to be, then where is the funding going to come from?
So why don't we do this? We'll go till 9 o'clock. And I think a lot of this discussion hasn't been fruitful, and it's something that we do need to work through, is what are we going to do with raises and how that might affect our budget. So maybe let's continue on with that discussion, and we'll get to 9 o'clock. We may go ahead and just break at that time. If we think that we can get some business done, we can talk about that going a little bit further. If not, we'll just recess and come back on Tuesday. So what I would like to do to kind of get us back to the discussion is if we could get that back on the board as far as those scenarios that the superintendent's office went through.
That one.
Okay. I don't know if we can get it over here, but can everybody see that, or maybe they can pull that up?
That's the one that has the additional BEP instructional personnel increases all the way down with the state reclassification impact. of $744,990.
I'm gonna try to get that in front of me so I can look at it. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these other options that the superintendent has brought forward for us. Now, this again would be with the assumption that we're going to increase our local revenue to this, by another $1 million. So it would be to increase the revenue from 38 million to 39 million. With that additional funding, we could fund what the superintendent has proposed is an increase in salaries of around $1,195,000. All right. What you've prepared are some different scenarios, and so I'm just going to ask the superintendent to maybe go through and kind of explain, talk
Sure.
about some of those scenarios, the 4 different scenarios that we're looking at. Now, again, just to be clear, the master, when we go back to the master schedule that you all have presented, this budget, that does not include any of those central office
No.
raises.
No.
And so, let me ask the superintendent, so what are you doing about those adjustments? Are you all just taking those adjustments out, or is that not being proposed to us now?
We hadn't figured those things in at this point. So right now, they're not in there. I think it was pretty much the will of this board that unless the teachers got a raise, you guys didn't want to look at salary readjustment. We do have some problems, especially with concerning to the chief financial officer position. But some of those other ones, going back to exactly back to what you said, we have some very experienced personnel that bring some valuable skill set to the table. Read a report this past week that says when you lose somebody, your human capital loss is about half of that person's salary. So that's what you should look at training the next person. That's about how much you'll spend on training that next person. So while I definitely don't want to lose the interim CFO, because he's been, can I say freaking amazing to this point? I've just said it. So he's amazing to this point of the things that he's cleaned up and the stuff that he's brought to us, and the pilot that he's leading for the state at this point. Yesterday he was at a financial training with Mary Andersky, and Allaview was there. Allaview is there because of Eric Parliament, and the state is now looking at Allaview because of Eric Parliament. So even though he's our interim, he's now leading a state initiative with financial matters. We have very experienced personnel that bring a lot to the table, and I don't want to lose those people because it would be vastly detrimental to this county. And I'm just saying that as somebody that could be gone in potentially 2.5 years if you don't renew my contract. Whereas these people will be here in the long term. We don't need to lose them. They are valuable members to this district. So as of now, no, sir, they're not sitting in there. Those salary fixes are not in there.
Okay. All right, so with that, if you can walk us through these 3 different,
Sure.
or 4 different scenarios, what you all have come up with.
So scenario 1, going back to exactly what Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman said about, this is asking the county commission for an additional $564,570. So figuring in those 2 amounts, the possible 4 scenarios are, we could give every classroom teacher, which is about 986 employees, about $1,212 of an increase. Scenario 2 would be all licensed personnel as listed under the instructional salary component of the BEP. So going back, that's K through 12 teachers, CTE teachers, special education, ELL. That also includes translators, art teachers, music teachers, PE teachers, and librarians, school counselors, including vocational ed counselors, system-wide instructional supervisors, special ed supervisors, and vocational supervisors, special ed assessment, principals, assistant principals at the elementary and secondary level, as well as social workers and psychologists. So all of those people under scenario 2, which is about 1,554 employees, would receive an extra $1,133 per year. Scenario 3 is across the board except part-time, food service, and the superintendent. That's about 1,611 employees. So that means each one of those would raise $741 per year. Scenario 4 goes back to the April 18th budget meeting where we brought the salary schedule and where we currently sit with regards to other counties. And so you guys had talked about, and we made a proposal and you guys talked about fixing those salary schedules 0 through 4 for bachelors and masters. So to do that would be a cost of $815,137. And if we got the increase from the county commission, that would still leave $379,945 to be budgeted for whatever you wanted to do with that. Those are the 4 scenarios.
Okay. So under scenario number 4, to address some of those beginning salaries, that would be the $815,000, and that would only leave $379 to be able to give
Yes, sir.
raises across the board.
Yes,
So
sir.
it'd be much lower
Yes,
if
sir.
we did that.
Yes.
Now, what Ms. Kinzer was talking about earlier, you were talking about just the bachelor beginning set. Oh, you were?
Not year 0, 1, instead of year 0, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So just do 0 and 1. Just do 2 steps instead of 4 steps.
So,
Gotcha.
Mr. Parliament, so that number to do, was that the 142,000? Was that for both bachelor and
That was just
masters?
bachelors.
Oh, okay, okay. So to do bachelor and masters, 0 through 2, is that what you said, Ms. Kinzer?
Yes.
That would be,
Do you have those
Oh,
numbers?
she's already got it.
Just at bachelor, it'd be 79,000, and at master's, it'd be 6,000. At ED special it comes to 112,251 I've got for all levels at beginning.
So what's your beginning number and what would you move it?
369.
That's the beginning for masters?
No, beginning for master's would be 42,181. Master's plus would be 46,118. ED special would be 46,860. And doctorate would be 49,192.
Yeah, yeah.
Want this?
I'm gonna take a picture of it and send it to you so he has it. If you don't mind.
Notice how the colors look good.
From this angle, the colors are fantastic.
Is it not patriotic too?
well, and I'm just going to say, I mean, I just try to get some of the discussion started. For me, kind of a base starting point is doing something with the schedule, with the scenario 4 of making those adjustments of those beginning salaries. Now, the number you all have is the 815. If we did something more along the lines of what Ms. Kinzer was proposing, I guess we're still waiting for the results to come in, but
Just make sure you're using the present PNA for this difference.
Mr. Moore.
The only concern I had with the salary schedule, it seems like we needed to do some more research on that. I know, Amanda, you've done quite a bit already. I just still wasn't satisfied that when you look at those numbers, that we were really comparing apples to apples when you look at benefits package on that. And I know that was partly because, and not your fault, but I think that was because you weren't able to get the information that really compared those. And that's what frustrates me, because again, if you're just talking about picking some surrounding counties and looking at the starting pay and then putting us somewhere in the middle or somewhere a little bit higher, technically, if we have a rich benefits package, which I believe we do compared to many other districts, in effect, it's actually a much bigger jump than it looks like on paper.
See, I was thinking that we did get a schedule that showed the comparison of benefits. Did we not?
No, but I think the reason,
Or maybe it was just the health insurance. Maybe that's what we looked at.
You've got a salary schedule.
It was from that OER report, so it was last year.
yeah.
It's in the board policies, the salary schedule within benefits included. It's both ways.
Right.
Problem we get into is the beginning teachers don't care about benefits. That's all they are looking at is that salary schedule. And so after 5 or 6 years, yeah, they're interested in benefits, but they're just looking at that starting salary when they're getting out of college.
And I can appreciate that, and I've had the same discussion with employees of my own too. But that doesn't mean that we can kind of ignore that when we're looking at what the total compensation package actually looks like.
Big pitching
It's a
point for
huge
us.
benefit.
Yeah, and we pitch that as much as possible, but on paper, they're just gonna look at that salary, but I can definitely do some more digging.
I mean, and again, to be fair, and looking at how hard it is to get that, I know it's going to be difficult to do a comparison across the board and really get to real numbers. I was still, where I was going with that was, I'm still a little uncomfortable. I would have liked to have seen a more comprehensive study done, if not by us, by a third party that can actually come up with a salary schedule that is truly driven by some real research, a research group, I guess Lean Frog or somebody like that does something similar to that. I know they do. I believe they do. I'm not saying they would do it, but something like that to me makes sense as a long-term solution. And where I'm coming at with that is, whether we do that this year or next year, what it seems like is that's something we need to adjust somehow. Whether you ask for it this year, you're going to ask, if we don't get it this year, you're going to ask for it next year, because it's something we need to take care of in our district, is to really adjust that. And I feel like, I know when you're saying you want to do just the starting pays to bring it up, I feel like we're piecemealing something that I really almost wish we were really taking a very comprehensive look at and doing the whole schedule, if that's what needs to take place.
We can engage Lean Frog in that work. We can do that.
I mean, I hope other board members
Well,
understand where I'm coming from there.
But my impression, and maybe I looked at the data that we looked at, my impression when I looked at the information that was provided to us was that it was a pretty stark difference on our beginning, like 0 through 5 bachelor, where we were like the last in all of the
and again,
counties
that's where I
around.
was getting to. I don't mean to cut you off on that,
Yeah.
but that's where it's an important difference. And this would get into, I talked about this the other time, when you start getting into benefits, it's not just, and I know there was another chart that was provided by the state that showed how much each district pays towards benefits on health insurance versus how much the employee pays. Now, that doesn't even tell the whole story, because then you get into what the actual insurance is, what the deductible is, how much money it is. So the actual value of that benefit may be much higher than it looks like on paper. And when I say much higher, I'm talking thousands of dollars, up to closer to almost $10,000 a year of a benefit there. So that can really swing when you talk about a starting pay that's, $3,000 off. If you have a much higher benefit, you're really getting a much higher pay when you look at the total picture.
And I appreciate that too. I mean, looking at the big picture, I guess I'm looking at things from a recruiting standpoint of trying to get the best talent right out of, the universities. And you may be right. I think maybe if you're doing an analysis, maybe you put the benefits in and maybe it's comparable. And maybe I misread things. And maybe it was just health insurance, but when I was looking at that, it seemed like everything was pretty well comparable. I didn't really notice any huge differences, but maybe I probably wasn't looking at it closely enough. But I just really feel like for somebody right out of university, the main thing they're going to be looking at is what's my beginning salary. And they probably should. Maybe they should look at benefits more, but I think what's really going to drive them and where they're going to go is going to be, okay, I can make this at Murray County, and I can go next door and I can make more money. That's real money in my pocket. A benefit is more kind of almost an intangible until you need it. And in people in different circumstances, that may even be more tangible to them. In certain circumstances, but I just think the more tangible of this is how much money I'm going to get in my pocket. This is how much I can purchase with that money. So that's where it just seemed like we really needed to address that beginning, at least with the bachelor, that range. Mr. Pennings.
I agree with that, but I think it has something to do with recruiting too. And I don't know how we recruit. I'm not knocking recruiting, but you tell these people, we're paying you $36,000 to start at a teacher. Your life insurance just for you, your health insurance just for you is free. Now, if you went out and bought this on the open market, this is what it would cost you. And keep in mind, too, that the $5,000 that it's costing us to insure you this year, you're not paying taxes on it. So you can add another 25% to what they're getting, because now you don't pay taxes on that benefit. So if we pay you $38,000 for starting and give you a health package, or we pay you $40,000 and you don't get a health package, you're losing in the long run. It's costing you money. to make 40 instead of 38?
Ms. Kinzer and then Mr. Moore.
I agree with Mr. Moore that, and I have said this over and over, is that we need to, I don't think it needs to be done because it'll take time and effort to look at the salary. It needs revision. It shouldn't have, if you're going to have a 20-year one, you shouldn't have a 0 at 16 and 19. And what's, after 15 years, that doesn't make sense. And not just for that reason, it's just that when you give, whatever y'all gave, 1,300 and something last year, when you do that, it kind of skews it just a little bit, too. So I do agree we need to look at it, and maybe that needs to be something that through policy or a committee needs to look at, and look at other salary schedules and see what it not, for years we tried to add years 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25 and top it out of that. Well, you wouldn't imagine how much money that entailed. I mean, that would take away raises entirely. So it never, it's kind of hard to justify that. I tell you what, I worked for insurance. I didn't work for salary. I worked for that 100% insurance. And there's one thing about Murray County, it has been in place for 30 years. Even when we started negotiating a contract, that was the first thing we signed off on, that we would now clearly, the state pays a portion of that. 45%, I believe, is one or the other. It's 45% of that comes from the state. It's a tremendous benefit. But no, beginning salary is what you're going to recruit them. We got to offer those benefits to keep them. In that first 3 years, if you evaluate them properly, you bring them along and you want to keep them, then you've got to offer a competitive salary to keep them and keep those benefits. Those that don't make it, then they're not rehired after a certain time, and you start the whole process over. I know that when you budget too, you don't always look at attrition, but it is huge. It really is. And probably maybe the difference in why so much of that money that was allocated for instruction and those areas were not spent because of attrition. But you don't want to, that's kind of like, you don't know where that's going to be, because when somebody retires with 40 years, 30 years, 25 years, they're going to be rehired at a much lower level. I guess I've talked enough.
Ms. Kinzer, we have never talked enough. To go back to what I'm going at, I would much prefer us, and I understand the idea of fixing the salary schedule for those levels. I would really prefer us to do a comprehensive look at the entire thing and not just piecemeal it. I guess that's where I was going with that. And I know that, yet again, we feel like we're in a rush to do it now to try to get it in before this budget year. But I think it would be the wise choice to have a really good look at that and look at what changes need to be made, taking into full account of that entire schedule, and do it right one time. And that may be, as Ms. Kinzer said, that may be including something on top of the 20-year. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what professionals would be able to tell us. But I'm uncomfortable making piecemeal changes to that, almost reactionary, when maybe we should look at the whole thing, and somebody could give us some advice on that. That was where I was going with it.
And I agree with you, Mr. Moore. I agree that we needed to look at it from a comprehensive standpoint. I guess that was the one thing when I looked at the data that really leaped out to me, is like, there's a big hole that we need to go ahead and plug. Once we plug that, we get the boat settled, then we can start rearranging the furniture in the boat. It seemed obvious to me. Maybe I was over reading the data, but it just seemed like that was a area that we really needed to make an adjustment. But that was just how I read it, Mr. Superintendent.
So you may not realize this, but I'm going to take you back to my kitchen table, July 2015. So when I knew I was getting an interview, I did a lot of research on this county, and I also looked at surrounding counties. And of the salaries that I could get, and doing the math at my table, I was like, they're a cherry-picking county. Because Oak Ridge is a cherry-picking county. We start low, but around 10 we go high. And you do the exact same thing. So what happens is the teachers start in other counties. They do the professional development, they get experience, they build their craft, and then we pay them more and we pick them. So we're getting them when they're already experienced, where we don't have to develop them, and they already have those years of experience, and they've developed their craft as teachers. Whereas because we pay a little bit less in the beginning, they're not coming to us as green. We don't have to train them as much. Because when you go down to year 10 and you move across, we are higher than all of the other surrounding counties that touch us. You're cherry picking. I just wasn't sure if you knew that. And that's not a bad thing. It's
But
not
we
a bad
have
thing.
had a brain drain.
No,
We have.
no.
We've had a brain drain.
I think this further reinforces the need for a comprehensive look at what we're trying to do with our salary structure. I mean, I think that just reinforces that. I mean, is it, because that's a strategy, I understand, I appreciate, that's a strategy we may have if that's what we as a district want to do. It may not be. I mean, we've had a lot of talk recently about bringing in these younger teachers and newer teachers. Is that what we want? I mean, is that what the superintendent wants? Again, that's why I think part of a comprehensive look at this really makes the most sense.
My thing is, I want to attract the best and brightest. I don't care how much experience they have. I want the best and the brightest. That's what I want. Because those people are going to move the keys. That's what I want.
And I would add, if you plug a couple of holes now and you do a comprehensive survey and the holes that you plug end up being higher than what comes back, then you've really messed it up when you try to do something with it.
Fine. All right, y'all have convinced me, I guess. Y'all have convinced me, but, okay, well, Mr. Dudley.
Well, I mean, I agree with Mr. Moore. I think we need to do a comprehensive study. The only problem is, I don't think we can do much prior to, May the 23rd is when that's our problem. I think our staff is overworked just trying to come up with a basic budget and then to try and do a whole lot of surveying work and all, and it's gonna be tough. So I don't know what we need to do.
All right, let's put the scenarios back on the board. All right, we got 3 other scenarios to talk about. Anybody want to jump in? We've got 3 other scenarios to talk about. And then we have Ms. Kinzer's scenario as well. So, Mr. Moore.
Make that number.
Just the feedback I got from last year, it just seems that many teachers were not happy with the way we structured it last year. And again, having sat through a whole lot of budget meetings and what we were intending to do, I think we were, again, trying to meet a certain purpose. But it seems to me that some people didn't appreciate that. Some people felt like we just should have stuck with the traditional structure of, if you've been here longer, you would have gotten, if you're as a percentage structure, obviously the more you get paid, the higher your percentage is going to be. And I just get the feeling that people want a percentage raise in some way, not a flat amount. I know that makes it a little more difficult to do the math on, but that's.
So now we're getting back to scenario 5, maybe.
No, it's 1A.
Well, let's talk about it real quick. I think that's a good idea. So let's think of something else. If we took the 1.195, Mr. Parliament, and we said, and Mr. Moore, what's your thoughts? Would this be all employees, all licensed employees? I mean, what kind of percentage would we be looking to see what that would equate to?
We could raise it a little bit more and do it 2.
Yeah, I think we came up with roughly 2 if we did that 1.195 across all 1,611.
So that would equate to 2%.
I think it's roughly 2%, yes.
That would be across the board, every employee with the exception of
Correct.
food service, which is governed by a different budget.
Correct.
And our part-timers.
Well, and also. Well, he's got to take me out as well. I am listed on there under 72,320 at a raise of 3,810. So it's only $4,000. Take that out. Yeah, but that's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's 2.4. Oh, never mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
With what I calculated here, it's 1,209,000, so it's pretty close to the 1,195,000, and that's with the superintendent taken out of that, so. So that, I mean, there's kind of the verification that 2% is going to get you right around that $1.2 million.
Mr. Pennings, you may have scenario number 6.
No, I wish. No, I don't. I agree with Mr. Moore. The biggest gripe I heard about last year was that everybody got the same. It wasn't a percentage. But I will tell you right now, the other gripe I heard and Mr. Moore heard and Denny heard, we want 5%. And I hear now that they're saying we want at least 4%. And I'm sorry, we can't please everybody all the time. I think all our employees need a raise, and if you do it like 2%, 3%, 4%, whatever you want, but if you do that across the board, yeah, I mean, I'll just take Chris, for example. Yeah, 2%, he gets a heck of a lot bigger raise than somebody that's making 38,000. I'm sorry. Welcome to the real world.
Well, and I think we have to also look at, for our licensed employees, that would not be the only raise that they would receive. They would get the 2% and in addition, the step raise as well. But for me, again, we're gonna, just thinking out loud. Looking at, going back to our master schedule, and I'm just going to say what my preference would be, but we may not do that. What my preference would be, if we included the 2% raise that we just looked at, as far as that amount, but we would go back and reduce the local tax revenue back down to what it was before, the 38,086. And what my thoughts would be is then to ask central office to find the savings in order to fund all that. And that may be a tall order, but anyway, I'm just thinking out loud and that may be impossible to be able to do that.
How much would that be? What would the cuts be?
I think you would go back to finding that 995,000.
Okay.
Because that was the additional ask to get to 1.195, so.
And we could do a little bit of what we did last year. We can take some of those one-time purchases in the cheapie and move them over to fund balance, like tires and tubes, gas. We can move some of that stuff over. So without possibly touching the elementary art positions or touching some of the other stuff on the Keys budget that you guys kind of established as things that y'all want to do next year. So we could try to do some, I hate to use the word creative financing because that sounds shady, but we could do some things in order to try to fit in another $900,000. We can go back and microscope it. That's not undoable.
I'm not sure.
I don't know, I'll be brief, I know you're tired of hearing me, but there's not a whole lot of difference according to what you're saying, and that's not anything to do with beginning, that we're just talking about across the board right now.
2% across the board.
Well, I'm talking about 3% right now, because according to your figures, it wouldn't cost but 260,000, something like that, 263 maybe, 1.76747 to do a 3%, as opposed to 1.467289.
No, it's about $600,000 more to do with 3%. It goes from 1.209 to 1.813.
Okay, I'm just looking at this that I copied off the.
Is that the 2017-18 budgeted salaries, proposed salary increases?
Yep.
Yeah, to go from, it's at 2% is 1.209 to a 3% is 1.813.
Okay, I was looking at 2.5 as.
Gotcha. Yeah, that only goes up 300,000-ish. Dialing. This is the fun part of budgets, is the dial.
Could someone remind me again, what was the central office increase in salary that we had talked about, that we pulled out? What was the total dollar figure on that?
I believe it was about 160,000.
And that's 160,000 if we left all the positions that were already there at the existing amounts.
Yeah.
And didn't add the.
Which we've already pulled out. And the budget amounts you're seeing are already reflective of that. So that means we'd have to add that back in.
And it is still your recommendation that we do so?
Yes.
With the two, I'm sorry, I should have turned it off. I'm sorry. But now that I have it on, how much did you say you'd have to find to take out of the budget? 900 and,
995.
okay.
And to correct Mr. Moore,
Uh-huh.
it's 129 is the central office, I'm sorry. Just under 130.
Okay, but then you need to think about what you want to do about beginning, if you're going to do anything about beginning. One time, raise it up.
Beginning,
You would just let beginning be 2% more, 35,000
yes.
and two.
Yeah,
and
that would
not-
raise up. Yeah, that would go up to.
I have 3%, it
what's
would go up to
35?
36,259, which would put us over,
Times .02.
well, it still wouldn't put us over any of the surrounding counties.
So do 35 plus 35,203.
At 3%, you still not up there.
35,907. So still doesn't get up to
No.
36 yet. No.
And when I made that suggestion, it was my intention that we get a full, study of that, and whatever is brought back to us, we then implement that. It would probably be obviously
Yeah.
next fiscal year.
Yeah.
But that was my intention of that we wouldn't do anything this year other than just the, whatever raise we did.
Just the 2% or, yeah.
So what you're talking about, that, was it 129 on the central office? What, in that scenario, that would also be part of the global comprehensive view of the schedules?
I know nobody wants to talk about that. I mean, in light of everything else we got going on, I know that's an uncomfortable subject, but I think some of those things we're going to have to address. I don't think we can just pull them out and ignore them. I think that's the reality of where we're at with that. So when I say that, if I'm looking at a 2% of, it comes out to roughly 1.2 million, plus the 129,000. So that's 1.49, my really bad math. So $1.5 million is what we're looking at coming up with under your scenario of trying to figure out where we're going to chop, cut, slice to make that come from somewhere.
I think it would be a little less than that, because to take it back to our previous budget on local taxes, we're going to have to come up with 995 to get the 2% plus the 130. So you're at a little bit about 125.
So you just found me some money just talking to me?
There you go.
This is great.
I think it's more
Let's talk a little longer.
1.125 versus $1.5 million. So
And, Mr. Parliament, I think Ms. Kinzer, she raised a valid point earlier, too, about, we are going to have some people that are going to retire, and that is going to affect the budget. And part of the budget process is we've got to, try to figure out what is going to be accurate. Has your office examined that to see, are we able to make any determination of whether there's more flexibility in some of those budgets because of that?
I think Scott can speak to that, but I think there's always going to be that attrition at the higher level and coming back in at a lower level. And that kind of brings us full circle to the county commission meeting last week, where we have budget amendments that we're trying to adjust, some of which are purely because of that they're kind of having some heartburn with. They don't understand why, there's that much money in a budget line item that all of a sudden needs to be moved someplace else that didn't get spent. And a lot of it is precisely because of that. So.
But is there kind of maybe, I guess, a pattern year to year where you can pretty well predict that, okay, there's at least this amount that may be a reduction? Mr. Gaines?
In a normal situation, this year we changed systems and we kind of, we had that, those issues there. But in a normal situation, by the time we get to the 20th day and we kind of move everybody where we're going to move, and then kind of get everybody in position, we've got the salaries kind of set, and then we can look at that versus the budget, and we're kind of able to project, hey, it looks like it's going to be, this is how much money we're going to expend. Now, you're always going to have, you're still going to have people that sometimes we get to the 20th day and we hadn't hired someone. Well, that budget may be in there, And so that's kind of where you get those savings from. Or you may have someone that decides to, they start the school year and they go tell Amanda, hey, I'm going to retire. And, they're at a 20-year salary, and we turn around, usually by the first of the year, we're hiring a new teacher most of the time, or someone like that. So you start to build some attrition there. And then those, by the time you interview and get a person on board, minimally, we try to do, at that time you were trying to do 10 days, but you're still talking about 10 days of salary that, we're paying a sub or we're doing something like that. And you do that 3 or 4 times or at 4 or 5 different schools, that money adds up by the time we get to October or November. We have a little bit of money there.
Mr. Penix.
Yeah, I don't know how it's done, but Mr. Gaines, you remember Mr. Bobo used to come up with us year after year after year around this time and say, we think the attrition, or I think the attrition is going to be this much due to the amount of teachers that have already submitted letters and things like that. Is there any way we can do that? And I don't know how he came up with the figure or anything. I'm just relying on past experiences. This is what happened all the time at budget time.
I mean, we know we'll be better on our roster certainly next year, and we'll be able to make a closer estimate of, where we are in terms of salary once we start the year and know where people are and get everybody hired. We'll be able to look at that versus the budget next year better. This year we had a lot of adjustments, and there were a lot of people that were budgeted in the wrong place and where the system rolled over. And once we made those moves, then we had to make those budget adjustments, like Eric talked about, what we ran into. Now that we've kind of gone through almost a whole year, we're trying to make those final adjustments to make the salary work. So this year, no. But and on the other hand, I think, Amanda, we got 60 estimated 60 people that were probably going to retire. So you could look at that as kind of a, but we don't tell principals you got to hire a new teacher either. We tell them to hire the best person that's qualified for the job. But there's always maybe some attrition there too that we would have.
If I'm hearing you correctly, I mean, a teacher retires with the higher pay and the most education they can get. That doesn't mean you're going to hire a beginner. You could be hiring somebody with the same amount of experience that the retired teacher has, so you're not
Yes.
saving any money now.
True,
But it rarely happens.
true.
I don't know. Yeah, thank you.
Well, just one point here, and I go back to look at what fund balance is going to be, 2.993 and 186 were from teacher budgeted regular instruction, special ed, and vocational that weren't spent on them. That could have been a 3% raise, a 4% raise. It could have been more teachers. It could have been more staff, whatever. It wasn't spent on them. It's in fund balance now. So whatever we're doing, I don't know how that happens. That's not attrition.
Yeah, but on the other hand, so, we have a $96 million budget, and when we spend, 98% of it, we're still sitting at $2 million going in the fund balance too. So it is, I mean, we could get closer to that. I think people would get a little nervous if we, got really above trying to expend 99%, I guess we would, there would probably be a little nervousness among everybody if we got that close. I mean, so you saying that there is, if we expend 98% of our budget, which is pretty good by everybody's standards, that's still $2 million going in the fund balance.
When you get above 98.5, when you get close to 99, that's where you run in the possibility of freezes around March, April, and May. And so that's the fickle nature, and the scary thing is that stop. We're getting too close, and right now, by prediction, we may go over the budget that we've allocated. And we definitely, I don't think anybody in here wants me to institute a freeze. No purchasing, no hiring, no nothing, because we're getting too close to expending overall budget. So coming in at 97% budget, that's pretty fiscally good.
Ms. Powers, and then Mr. Moore.
It's actually me. When you say putting a freeze on in March or April, as far as hiring goes, is that correct?
Well, as far as anything instructional is considered. without doing budget amendments and moving things to different pockets.
What value is there to the students in April? I mean, I know we gave out like 30 computers or whatever, but they're gonna get to use them for 2 weeks. I mean, I would much rather that money have been spent in August
Yeah.
as opposed to having been spent May 1st. Same thing with the teacher. A teacher being hired on April 15th doesn't get us any closer to reaching our EOC levels or ACTs or any
True.
of our keys.
Yeah.
So I really don't care if you have to institute a hiring freeze. I personally think you should be spending more money on the front end. Otherwise, if I'm a commissioner listening to this, I'm thinking, well, then I don't really need to give you 2% of your budget.
Yeah, I just want to, we need to be careful discussing about if we're looking at budget amounts and what's in a certain category. And because, I mean, if we allocate a certain amount to a budget, that doesn't mean we have to spend it in that category. It more than likely means, and I think from the fact that we have a turnover in our budget department, that we maybe made some budgeting errors or some other changes. There's probably a couple of factors there. But again, as with your own home budget, you wouldn't just because you allotted so much money to your car payment every month, every year, if you had a little extra in there, doesn't mean you go buy a new car just to spend the money. Sometimes you have to make adjustments, and that's what a budget is. It's a working document. It's where we estimate it, think we are. We just can't, just because it looks like there's some extra money in that account, it probably means we messed up in some other areas, maybe cut those closer, and we're going to have to move them over, which is, again, that's what the budget amendments were for, to move those around as we realize that reality is not always what we planned in the budget. So I think that's just something we need to be careful of. Just because we had budgeted those to salaries, we can't just assume and automatically lock those into that.
And I think we can do a better job this year of identifying those in September, October, November versus April and May. Because that kind of leaves you no time and no options to do what we're trying to do now, so.
Mr. Pennings.
When you say a freeze, Chris, in March or April, seeing our teachers get paid year-round now, would that also affect their pay?
Well, that would be like if we had a teacher that went out and we needed to bring another teacher in, but we're getting too close and we think that additional salary may send us over budget, then that's something, it's really hard to say one general thing that would cause that. It could also go for instructional supplies, it could go for multiple things. So what I was basically saying overarching is that staying on expending 97% of your budget is a good fiscal practice. Getting too close to 100%.
All right, Ms. Powers or Ms. Parker?
Sorry.
And then we're going to start winding down like we mentioned before, since it's 9 o'clock. Yeah, second.
I was just going to say, I understand what you're saying, Mr. Moore, as far as it being a working document, but I think there's a reason why those numbers, those sections are probably inflated a little bit, because commissioners, taxpayers, they want to pay for teachers. They want to pay for textbooks. They want to pay for the things that our kids need. They don't necessarily want to pay for a new car or, even new ceiling tiles probably. They're much more concerned with what our kids are learning in the classroom, I would hope. And I think that's probably why we have some extra money in there. So I think that may explain why it's there.
All right, so we talked about before we would go to around 9 o'clock and see where we're at. I threw out a possibility of it would be a 2% raise of what we looked at, and we would actually cut back on the local funding back to, based upon what our projection is for this fiscal year. I don't know if we want to keep talking, if we think we can go ahead and get some business done tonight, or do we need to marinate on this a little bit more and come back on Tuesday? And the possibility is we could ask central office to maybe we could direct them to go through that scenario and then bring it back to us, and we could look at that as an alternative plan or we could explore other plans, or we can just shut it down tonight. So what's the will of the committee? Mr. Pennings?
Yeah, I would just like to know, we go back where we have to cut from the keys. I would like to know when we come back on Tuesday, just exactly what we're cutting on the keys and what the impact would be on the students.
And to go with that too, I heard Dr. Marzak mention about just kind of shifting things over to the fund balance. I'm a little kind of uncomfortable just moving things around to find the cuts, just to shift them from recurring to one-time fund balance. I mean, because keep in mind, we're not talking about tonight since we've already gone through a lot of this, but we still have a lot of things as far as repairs and maintenance items that we're going to need to address. And I just want to be careful that we're not further dipping into fund balance for things that are realistically instructional items that we need to be taking care of every year.
All right, so do we want, as a committee, do we want to give some direction to the superintendent? Are we ready for that? Or we need more discussion? Mr. Dudley?
I think we've given him probably enough direction, and, you know, I'm satisfied with letting him go and come back with, based on what we've discussed tonight. You know, the option of the 2% and then readjusting the revenue and see what areas he can find some savings in.
Do you have anything, Mr. Moore?
The only other thing, since we didn't get to the two other items on there about where that funding would come from and how that fits in with this bigger picture. Because I noticed the only thing that concerns me about that, to tie it in, and I think Mr. Parliament mentioned this, because we're really not budgeting for those kind of maintenance things on an annual basis. And I think that was a good point, that when we're talking about a 7-year painting schedule, whatever the schedule is, that's something we really shouldn't be pulling from fund balance on. We should be budgeting for on an annual basis. If we know we're going to be on a painting schedule that's going to cost X amount of dollars every year, that should go in the budget, so that we have a realistic picture of what we're spending every year. So I know we didn't get to that. I kind of wanted to, and maybe it's too late in the process to really recalculate that, but that's something we really should be moving towards on any, not just the painting, but anything like that. I think that was the whole point of the EMG report, is to start looking at what we need to start budgeting annually out of actual funds and start looking at how that fits in with the budget process.
Mr. Pennings?
I agree with Mr. Moore, but when you start putting in the budget painting schedule, this year, $200,000. Landscaping, $200,000. That's $400,000 more you have to ask the county commission to fund. And in my experience, it's hard enough getting the county commission to fund for education, much less painting and landscaping. And if you have to take out of your general budget something for the keys in order to do landscaping and painting, I would much rather leave it out of the budget and take it out of fund balance.
All right. And that may be something we can come back on Tuesday, and maybe we'll get that hashed out. But at this point, I do think that we need to provide some guidance to the superintendent's office on what exactly we want them to come back and maybe present to us an alternate proposal. And so I am going to put something in the form of a motion, just so we have some clarity and we can go from there. All right, so what I would propose as a motion would be to direct the superintendent's office. We would leave the current budget as proposed as is. And if you put the salary schedule back up, or the salary scenarios.
Of the scenarios? Okay, yeah, it is.
So we would allocate $1,195,082, but it would be a 2% raise for all employees with the exception of food service, part-time, and the superintendent. And that would be funded with an adjustment to what has been presented to us tonight we would actually reduce the local tax revenue back to the original proposed amount of $38,086,814, and the superintendent's office would go back through their budget and find the necessary funding through cuts, which they would present back to us as part of this particular option for us to consider, so that we could see where those funding cuts would be made up of.
So one point of clarification, we're going to look for the 995,000 that we're pulling out of revenue. Does that include the central office?
Not in my
Sal-
motion. Now, we can
Okay.
amend that motion, but my motion is just to give the 2% raise to all employees. Now, so that's my motion. I don't know if anybody wants to second that or not. All right. So we got a second by Mr. Moore. All right, so open the floor for discussion. Ms. Parker or Ms. Powers?
I know I was late, but I have a question about really kind of this whole agenda. When was the parallel education information added on to the agenda? Was that on it like this weekend?
No, I think it was added today.
Okay.
Correct, Ms. Parker? Yeah.
What about the expedited painting schedule and the landscaping budget? Those were all added today as well?
Well, it's something I sent out to everybody several weeks ago, but yes,
Right.
added to the agenda
But you're the
later.
chairman of this committee,
Yes.
Mr. Bates.
Thank you,
so,
Ms. Parker.
And then the salary breakdown that we're looking at up there, that's dated 5/9/17, so I assume that also got added today?
Yes.
I was not planning on coming to this meeting tonight because of other commitments, but seeing the number of things that we have added to our agenda, I thought that we were trying to be transparent. I thought that we were trying to give everybody the opportunity to view our agenda. And I don't have any problem having the discussion on this, but I'm not comfortable voting on some of these things because of the fact that we really didn't provide any notice. When you're adding things at 12, 1, and 2 o'clock on the day of a meeting, and then you're voting on it, I'm not comfortable doing that, so I will be abstaining from any motion related to this.
And I appreciate that, Ms. Parker, and my preference would be that we would get this information well in advance as well. But we're under a tight schedule. We've got to get something to the commission here pretty quick, and so certainly if anybody ever objects to anything being on the agenda, we as a committee do not have to approve that agenda. As far as transparency, I'm very particular about transparency, and part of the committee process is nothing is final until it gets to the board. And so everything that we're doing right now is basically kind of a work session. And so we're trying to collaboratively work together to try to figure out, what are we going to do as far as a raise. We knew that we were going to have to talk about a raise. I do wish that we maybe could have got some of these scenarios where we could study those in advance. I certainly agree, but we all knew that we had to try to figure out something on that.
And please don't misunderstand me. What bothers me, though, is that in order for me to be able to do my job, I feel like for my constituents, I need time to look at this. And I don't like having to digest these different scenarios with all the other things that I've got going on in my life on the day of the meeting. So I just would encourage central office to be conscious of that. And I don't have a problem having the discussion, but again, I don't think that we're in any position to vote on some of these things.
Well, and I also just want to point out, we've been here for 3 hours, and we've been hashing through this, and what we're looking at right now as a proposal is not even on there. This is something, and we've had a lot of good dialogue, other scenarios and everything that we've reviewed. We've got to try to figure this out. I mean, this has been a kind of a brainstorming type session. So that's my proposal.
I understand. Let me just say, though, that my preference from central office going forward, and I have said this to Stan, because when he adds things to his facilities agenda, he oftentimes sends us out an update. Hey, this has been added. I didn't even realize until about 4 o'clock today that the parallel education was on there. I didn't realize the BEP projection or whatever was on there. I can't just have all these balls in the air and try and make things work and do a good job if I'm trying to do this stuff on the fly. And I understand that we have a tight timeline. And I understand that y'all have been meeting for a while, and I appreciate the work that y'all are doing, and I understand it's very much a work session. But I would just appreciate if central office would send us out some type of notification, because when I get an agenda, I try to review it when I have time, which is usually on the weekend, and I don't usually pick it back up until the day of the meeting. And if things are getting added, if things got added in between that time, then I haven't had time to do my due diligence, and I just don't think that that's fair.
And point well taken. I agree with you. It's not preferable. It's not my preference at all. But what we're looking at right now, what's on the floor, is just a proposal to them to bring back to us on Tuesday for us to consider more, so that we have something in front of us that we're not just kind of like, and that's to let the public know, to have more transparency, that this is something that we're going to be reviewing. We may get some input, and maybe that's not what the public wants, but we've got to do something, and we've got to start, figuring out something. So that's why I'm making the proposal. Mr. Bennings.
And Mr. Bates, are we going to bring up at a later time central office raises, or are they dead, or what?
I'm certainly, if somebody wants to make a amendment to my proposal would be more just a stripped down version of just the 2% for all employees. But I think there's certainly, there's a valid viewpoint that maybe we should be looking at adjusting those other areas. So I'd certainly, if anybody wants to amend that, they could.
I'd like to amend it.
All right, motion to
I
amend.
would like to amend it that the central office bring us, I guess, an option that would include where you would find the money for that as well.
Okay. All right, we got a second by Mr. Pennings. And so your motion is not necessarily, you would kind of have two different options, or you just want that part of the one package? Option A, option B. Okay. Do you all understand the motion to amend? All right. All right, so we've got a motion to amend. Any discussion on that motion to amend? Seeing none, we're ready to vote on the motion to amend.
Just for clarification, this is just the motion to amend, right? This is not the actual motion. Okay.
All right, just for clarification, so the motion we are voting on is just a motion to amend. Okay, I didn't see that in the text. Okay. All right, that motion does pass on a vote to 6-0. All right, moving back to the main motion. So the main motion would be to direct the superintendent's office to come back to us next Tuesday with another scenario where we would fund a 2% raise under option A. And the superintendent's office, as far as being able to fund that, they would have to find the funding through cuts. We would actually go back to the original local tax revenue number. And then option B would be, we would also include the central office increases. So does everybody understand the main motion? All right, any discussion on that motion? All right, seeing none, we're ready to vote. Mr. Moore. That motion does pass. All right, and so, again, we're free when we come back on Tuesday. There may be other scenarios that we may look at to try to figure out, but But we do, hopefully next week, we can begin the process of finalizing things so that we will be done in time to be able to present something to the county commission, which is the following week.
Yep.
So,
And Ms. Parker, we'll try to get these loaded by Friday afternoon, and we'll send an email, and then that's it. So we'll definitely do that.
okay. All right, so if there's no other business, motion to adjourn by Mr. Moore, second by Mr. Dudley. Any discussion on the motion? Say none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any